Contagious Cults, Meme Theory and the Evolution of 5 New Religions, written by Andrea Diem, narrated by Paul Metcalfe. But if it is true that human minds are themselves to a very great degree the creations of memes, then we cannot sustain the polarity of vision we considered earlier. It cannot be memes versus us, because earlier infestations of memes have already played a major role in determining who or what we are. The independent mind struggling to protect itself from alien and dangerous memes is a myth. There is a persisting tension between the biological imperative of our genes on the one hand and the cultural imperatives of our memes on the other. But we would be foolish to side with our genes. That would be to commit the most egregious error of pop sociobiology. Besides, as we've already noted, what makes us special is that we, alone among species, can rise above the imperatives of our genes, thanks to the lifting cranes of our memes. Daniel C. Dennett, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Evolution and the Meanings of Life. Abstract. This small book offers a critical presentation of meme theory as developed by Richard Dawkins and Susan Blackmore, which helps in understanding why some new religious movements have become more popular over time. Ideas, or memes, survive by making copies of themselves in host environments, usually human brains. But with fewer hosts than ideas, competition exists for these scarce enclaves. Moreover, the strongest ideas are not necessarily the best, but rather those that can survive and make copies of themselves. Meme theory helps explain how new religions arise and what accounts for their survival and success. 5 NRMs are used to illustrate these catalysts and demonstrate how mimetic ideas propagate. The Self-Realization Fellowship, Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, God's Direct Contact, Kuan Yin, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and Calvary Chapel. Introduction. Meme theory and its applicability to the growth of new religions. The popular usage of the term meme dates back to Richard Dawkins' 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, where he defines meme, derived from the Greek word mimeme, as a unit of imitation. He goes on to suggest that memes are similar to genes in that they are replicators, which must have sufficient longevity, fecundity, and copying fidelity. Arguably, it is copying fidelity that is central to the continual propagation and success of any specific meme. The thesis behind memetics is a surprisingly simple one, even if still mired in controversy. For any idea to be successful in being passed on beyond one person, it must be robust in making copies of itself to a new proprietor, who in turn has the capacity, if not the overt willingness, to communicate the same to others. Interestingly, the particular meme or entity doesn't have to be true or evidential to be successful in replicating itself. It only has to be good at being easily transmissible and fortuitous in spreading itself to a number of other replicators who will advance the meme forward. Although Dawkins' condensed spelling of the term meme, shaving off my, is new, the concept itself has a varied pedigree throughout history. For example, Thomas Henry Huxley prefigures the notion when he argues that the struggle for existence holds as much in the intellectual as in the physical world. A theory is a species of thinking, and its right to exist is coextensive with its power of resisting extinction by its rivals. A similar use of the word can also be found in the Nobel Prize winner in literature in 1911, Maurice Maeterlinck's book The Life of the White Ant, where he approvingly quotes Richard Semon's sweeping generalization on memory and then proceeds to add his own commentary. Engrammata upon the individual meme, comprising also their ekphories. Nearly all the experts admit, being scarcely able to do otherwise, that most instincts owe their origin to a reasoned and conscious action. For these millions of years the same insect has gone on living, with the result that not a single one of its experiences has been lost. there has been no interruption of its existence or disappearance of its memories. An individual memory has remained, and this has never ceased to function or to centralize every acquisition of the collective soul. Arthur Koestler, in A Summing Up, provides his own acerbic understanding of memes when he writes, "Man's deadliest weapon is language. He is susceptible to being hypnotized by slogans as he is to infectious diseases. And when there's an epidemic, the group mind takes over." 15 years after first coining his usage of the word meme, Richard Dawkins compared religion as akin to a computer virus that often infects its hosts unknowingly. Meme theory became exceedingly popular and ubiquitous with the advent of the Internet and the World Wide Web, where it became so widespread that it soon devolved into a cliché, and one often misunderstood and misapplied, at least according to Dawkins' definition of the same. Susan Blackmore devoted an entire book, The Meme Machine, to memes, and attempted to provide a solid scientific framework by which Dawkins' original concept could be rigorously tested and verified. She further defined and catalogued a series of memes as a memeplex. Explains Blackmore, "Memes are habits, skills, songs, stories, or any other kind of information that's copied from person to person. Memes, like genes, are replicators. That is, they are information that is copied with variation and selection. Because only some of the variants survive, memes, and hence human cultures, evolve. Memes are copied by imitation, teaching, and other methods, and they compete for space in our memories and for the chance to be copied again. Large groups of memes that are copied and passed on together are called co-adapted meme complexes, or memeplexes. Despite the widespread use of memetics across a variety of disciplines, the term itself has been severely criticized by a number of scholars who suggest that unlike its biological gene counterpart, whose basis was revolutionized by the discovery of the double helical structure of DNA, memes lack an underlying marker code with which to properly understand how and why it propagates as it does. While these other objections to meme theory have some validity, what is too often overlooked is that even in the life sciences, the gene itself is an ever-evolving concept. It would be a mistake to prematurely reify it as something permanently stable. Nevertheless, as an intellectual tool to study the constituent parts of organic matter, it has become invaluable in eliciting deeper insights on how cells function. Likewise, memes have become a very useful tool with which to study how and why some ideas, many of which lack any semblance to reality, became widespread, whereas others that do contain truthful insights do not. In an essay entitled Viruses of the Mind, analogized that certain religious creeds and practices can be likened to parasitical computer code that can spread its malware by cloaking its nefarious purposes under the guise of being something benign and or beneficial. Because of this, the unwary recipient may then readily pass on the viral algorithm to others in his or her network. Questionable religious memes, suggests Dawkins, work similar to such computer viruses. As he elaborates, think about the two qualities that a virus or any sort of parasitic replicator demands of a friendly medium, the two qualities that make cellular machinery so friendly towards parasitic DNA, and that make computers so friendly towards computer viruses. These qualities are, firstly, a readiness to replicate information accurately, perhaps with some mistakes that are subsequently reproduced accurately, and secondly, a readiness to obey instructions encoded in the information so replicated. To illustrate his point further, Dawkins writes, "Progressive evolution of more effective mind parasites will have two aspects. New mutants, either random or designed by humans, that are better at spreading will become more numerous, and there will be a ganging up of ideas that flourish in one another's presence, ideas that mutually support one another, just as genes do, and as I have speculated, computer viruses may one day do. We expect that replicators will go around together from brain to brain in mutually compatible gangs. These gangs will come to constitute a package, which may be sufficiently stable to deserve a collective name, such as Roman Catholicism or Voodoo. What matters is that minds are friendly environments to parasitic self-replicating ideas or information, and that minds are typically massively infected. Though it is certainly true that Richard Dawkins and others of his ilk, such as Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and the late Christopher Hitchens, the four horsemen of new atheism, is hypercritical of dogmatic religion, it doesn't then follow that mimetic theory and the idea of informational viruses should be discarded simply because we disagree with his strident skepticism. Simply put, meme theory is a tool, and as such should be utilized with caution and care when trying to understand why some religions prosper as they do. In my Introduction to World Religions course at Mount San Antonio College, I provide an illustrative example of how meme theory can help explain why some religions are more popular than others, regardless of the truth or falsity of their respective ideologies. For example, the most popular religion in the world today is Christianity, which dates back 2 millenniums and has more than 2.38 billion adherents. Islam, which postdates the death of Jesus Christ by roughly 6 centuries, has 1.91 billion followers and is expected within 4 decades to overcome Christianity in terms of total numbers. These two religions, however, don't exist without Judaism, which predates both of them by hundreds of years. Yet Judaism only has 14.6 million believers. Why such a massive discrepancy, especially given how fundamental Judaism's prophets, practices and beliefs are to Christianity and Islam? To be sure, there are many answers, but the most obvious and glaring one is that Judaism doesn't proselytize for new converts in any way comparable to the way Christians are encouraged to spread the teachings of Jesus around the known world, or how Islam became a powerful political and religious force through military conquest, trade, pilgrimage, and missionaries. Mimetic theory is operable here since any religion that tends to resist vigorous methods of spreading its ideas to outsiders and across borders will, because of these constraints, be limited in comparison to others that adopt more aggressive means of preaching. In India, Jainism is another illustrative example of a religion that, unlike Buddhism or other forms of Hinduism, doesn't advocate seeking out new recruits. Thus, even though mimetic theory lacks a coherent scripted code underlying its varied transmissions, it still serves as a highly functional way to trace specific informational traits and how they are exploited to the advantage of one religion versus another in a competitive space where ideas are plentiful but host environments are scarce. Yet memes are never propagated without a conducive and changing context. They are historically contingent, and as such are largely dependent upon the communication and technological tools available in a given society. This is why German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas are seminal, since what he understood better than most was that belief systems can undergo radical transformations depending on the type of information available to any one population. His ideas were later echoed by the media critic Marshall McLuhan, who famously argued that the medium is the message. In McLuhan's view, the pipeline that facilitates mimetic transmission is elemental, and cannot be ad hoc divorced from the content that emerges through it. In this book, we plan to utilize Nietzsche's penetrating insights and apply 5 mimetic concepts that help explain how new religious movements grow and prosper amidst a sea of competition. Susan Blackmore has done extensive work on mimetics and has coined some of the more significant memes and how they apply to religion. In particular, factors determining popularity appear to revolve around 3 fundamental principles. 1. Value-related incentives. 2. Mimetic simplicity. And 3. Mimetic distribution. However, there are others as well. In this work, we are focusing on piggyback memes, Trojan horse memes, mimetic distribution, mimetic simplicity, and mimetic incentives. 5 new religious movements are used to illustrate these incentives and demonstrate how mimetic ideas propagate. The Self-Realization Fellowship, SRF, founded by Paramahansa Yogananda, Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, MSIA, founded by John Roger Hinkins, God's Direct Contact, Kuan Yin, founded by Ching Hai, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKON, founded by Swami Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, and the Calvary Chapel Church, founded by Chuck Smith. To accomplish this aim, each new religion's history and beliefs will be detailed with a special focus on its one or more distinctive mimetic cultural features. What we will find is how differing spiritual ideas promulgate depending on how they are presented, and in what context. Memes-like beliefs are not of one kind, and thus it's important to track how and why particular religions flourish, and others are less successful in gathering new recruits. Meme theory is a sensible tool to better understand this phenomenon. 1. Friedrich Nietzsche and the rise of new religions. In the latter part of the 19th century, when Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he believed that future generations would suffer immeasurably from God's premature funeral. Why? Because without such a God, without such an ultimate meaning of concern, humans would have to stare reality in the face and discover that there was no ultimate purpose to human existence. Humans are the expendable result of blind evolutionary processes and, as such, have no ontological status in the grand scheme of things. As Nietzsche argued, without God we are left with nihilism, which is another way of saying that without ultimate meaning we're left with no meaning at all. Hence, when humans kill their belief in God, they must then turn to their own inner selves, and in doing so, discover that there is no truly objective truth by which to govern their lives. We become wanderers, a lost species. Yet, though Nietzsche was prophetic for his time, God has died more or less in the secular world. He did not realize how resilient belief in God would be. We now live in a scientific age where it's difficult for us to believe as our ancestors before us did. But, as Mircea Eliade so rightly pointed out, sacred feeling, the sense of the numinous, is not a stage in human development but an integral element of one's very psychophysical makeup. Even if we kill one god, another will rise up to replace him or her. We are religious beings to the core, even in our strident atheism. Hence, Nietzsche's prophecy is not about killing our spiritual sensibilities. Those are forever with us, barring some future DNA tinkering, but rather about the decay of a certain cultural icon, the uplifted totem of our Western society. And, according to Nietzsche, we as a society were not ready for it. We were pretending to be adults and mature scientists, when in point of fact we were merely schoolchildren, playing too early with our chemistry sets. We were not ready for the explosion. We were not ready for the Nietzschean existential hammer. We were not ready, in sum, to kill meaning and face the consequences. But ironically, Nietzsche was wrong about God's death. Indeed, we killed a certain form of God, the mythic and naive belief we carried over from primitive times, but we did not, perhaps cannot, kill God. God, as an ever-resilient idea, resurrects. God does not die per se, but only certain versions of him, her, it do. Thus, the history of religion is not about God's fast retreat from the day-to-day affairs of the world in the wake of humans' continual progress, but rather about how varying versions of God arise and decay over time. Likewise, religion does not die out when humans progress scientifically. Instead, it adapts itself to the new cultural milieu. Religion is not an outside force penetrating into the heart of humans, but instead part and parcel of the neurological history of humans, and thus is intimately connected with our own psychological projections. To destroy religion, we would have to destroy who we are. Therefore, God persists in various manifestations, and religion persists, despite protestations to the contrary, since they arise from our biological heritage. The real question, then, is not about why humans are religious, but how human spiritual yearning projects itself differently over historical time and geographical space. A classical example to illustrate the resilience of religion and its evolutionary nature occurred in the Roman Catholic Church. In the 15th century, most leaders of the Roman Catholic Church still believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Those who thought otherwise were severely reprimanded, put in jail, tortured, or, worse yet, executed. At this time, devout Christians felt that their sacred book, the Bible, indicated that the earth was the centre of the universe. If astronomers like Galileo and Copernicus showed evidence to the contrary, it would mean that the Bible was wrong. And if the Bible was wrong, it would mean that God was wrong. And if God was wrong, well, he was no longer God. Such a thought was impossible in light of church teachings. Hence, to question the Bible's astronomical version of cosmology was akin to questioning God's supreme authority and knowledge. It is little wonder, therefore, that the radical thinker Giordano Bruno, who posited a theory of multiple universes, was burned at the stake. Better for a false believer to die than to have millions of faithful Christians have their belief in God shattered. 5 centuries later, however, Pope John Paul II essentially apologized in 1992 for the Church's blunder and its maltreatment of intellectual pioneers. This same Pope, by the way, acknowledged the irrefutable evidence of evolution. Yet, though Copernicus and Galileo eventually won, and though the Roman Catholic Church conceded to science that the earth does indeed revolve around the sun, the belief in a Catholic God did not diminish considerably. Why not? Because the Church eventually adapted its version of God to harmonize with science's latest discoveries. In more precise terminology, the Catholic Church's idea of God evolved, and it evolved precisely because it was confronted with a new environment, opened up by the telescope and new mathematical predictions that would damage its credulity if it did not or would not change. The telescope, the extension of the empirical eye, was too convincing to ignore. Thus, if Catholicism dismissed the findings of astronomers, which it first tried to do, it would also have to disenfranchise a growing segment of its membership. Despite the fact that the Catholic Church allowed its concept of God to slowly evolve, it nevertheless disconnected itself from growing schisms in its ranks, both from the liberal and conservative wings. Where did such members now turn, if not towards the Catholic Church? New religions. Even if those new religions were merely genealogical extensions or offshoots from more mainstream faiths. Thus it's not surprising to see the protest movement turning both liberal and conservative, liberal in the direction of science and deism, and conservative in the direction of biblical fundamentalism and its unimpeachable authority. These twin responses led to new movements, new faiths, and new interpretations. Hence, in one significant aspect, the evolution of human conceptions of God is the impetus behind the evolution of new religions, which attempt to cope with any church's attempt to integrate or denigrate its faith with humanity's new or old discoveries of the world around them. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said that we've killed God, the Jewish Christian version, prematurely in the latter part of the 19th century. At God's funeral, there'll be a banquet where other gods will vie for the newly bereft followers. Nietzsche feared that only the god of nihilism would be the winner. How could humans muster up the strength or the naivete to believe in anything else? Yet Nietzsche was only partially correct. Nihilism, vis-à-vis existentialism, vis-à-vis postmodernism, certainly does have its assemblage, since even dead gods can be resurrected in newly disguised forms, some of which are better adapted to the mode of the time. Thus, cultural decay can indeed lead to new religious movements. A close analysis of the etymology of the word culture is revealing. Its root is cultus. Culture is another way of saying established cult, or an established way of thinking, living, and being. Any time a culture is severely questioned, usually epitomized by a questioning of its most cherished gods or values, by a significant portion of its population, it leads to new cults of thought. Culture does not so much disappear as change. Religions do not so much decay as much as evolve. God's decay, then, does not lead to his or her demise, but to the opposite, his or her resurrection in a new version or form. Nietzsche realized that Europe's God was on a death march, and in its steps a much more terrifying God would emerge, that of nihilism, no meaning and no purpose. Such a God did arise and walk, but so did countless others which contravened the philosophy of existentialism. Such cults are society's responses to change. The death of one religion leads to the birth of a new one, even if that offspring arises within the midst of its parent. From Judaism we get Christianity. From Catholicism we get Lutheranism. From Hinduism we get Buddhism. From Buddhism we get Zen. From the medieval Indian tradition of Niguna Bhakti poets, collectively known as Sant Mat, we get Radhaswami. From Radhaswami we get Ekankar, and so on. Each emerges, then rejects, then branches separately away from the parental source. The god of an earth-centered cosmology dies only to reappear as a bigger god of a sun-centered cosmology, only to die again and re-emerge as the progenitor of the Big Bang and multiple universes. God's adaptations are innumerable because human desire for ultimate meaning is, given the present state, insatiable. Why do some religions become more popular than others? Why do some new religions fulfill the needs of a larger segment of the population where other religions struggle and die out? To answer that question, in the next section we need to turn from Nietzsche, who laid the groundwork for why and how gods and religions decay and arise, to the mimetic theory of cultural evolution, particularly as Richard Dawkins and Susan Blackmore present it. This is because ideas are like genes, and they need to reproduce in order to survive and be passed on to a new generation. In the following sections, we'll focus on 5 new religions, and how certain mimetic ideas became operative in the spread and eventual acceptance of their respective teachings. 2. Piggyback Memes, the Self-Realization Fellowship, founded by Paramahansa Yogananda. Paramahansa Yogananda, born Mukanda Lal Ghosh, 1894-1952, was a follower of Sri Yukteswar Giri, 1855-1936, of Serampore, Bengal, India. He was initiated into Kriya Yoga, a psychophysical discipline that includes breathing exercises, pranayama, body postures, asana, mudra, hand gestures, and concentrative visualization techniques, dhyan, in order to achieve enlightenment, moksha. Yukteswar was a disciple of Lahiri Mahasaya of Benares, 1828-1895, who, it is claimed by many of his devotees, to have been initiated into the ancient practice of Kriya Yoga by a mysterious Himalayan sage, honorifically known as Mahavatar Babaji. The troublesome issue concerning Babaji is that he is alleged to be hundreds of years old, or even deathless, appearing by divine fiat whenever he so desires it. Ashoka Kumar Chatterjee, a historian and biographer of Kriya Yoga, claims that Sai Baba of Shirdi, 1838-1918, was also initiated by Lahiri Mahasaya. His assertion is based on a close reading of Mahasaya's so-called secret diary. My own sense is that whenever a guru alleges that their spiritual master is ageless, non-locatable, and only assumes a physical body when they so desires, then it appears to be a case of genealogical dissociation. This is when a guru or a spiritual movement doesn't want to publicly admit or acknowledge their indebtedness to an actual historical personage or lineage. Paul Twitchell did this when he founded Ekankar in 1965 and denied that he was associated with Swami Premananda and Kirpal Singh, who replaced both with the fictitious gurus Ribazatars, who he claimed was a Tibetan monk more than 500 years old, and Sudha Singh, who he said he met in Allahabad, India, in the 1930s, despite the fact that he'd never left the United States at that time. It appears that Lahiri Mahasaya, for whatever reasons, cloaked his original inspiration for teaching Kriya Yoga as he did, and created a mythological being that, ironically, is now believed to be real. A similar occurrence also occurred in Ekankar and related groups, where a number of Ekists and readers of Twitchell's fanciful narratives allege that they have seen and conversed with Ribazatars. Genealogical dissociation is an important and instructive concept to understand how some new religions emerge as they do. David Christopher Lane, who coined the concept as it relates to Indian-related panths, groups, explains the modus operandi behind it. An important question arises when one reviews the startling tendency inherent in many of the new panths and their founders to deny their religious heritage, a denial which has taken on the form of name deletions, plagiarism, and cover-ups. Why? Though there may indeed be many answers, such as SCP's Spiritual Counterfeits Project, skepticism of Eckankar's late founder, Twitchell was a one-eyed man who preferred his own fabrications to the truth. It becomes quite apparent on closer inspection that there is one fundamental reason. Simply put, it is not that the new panths are in all instances concerned with suppressing their historical roots, but rather that they are overly anxious about their own distinctiveness as a new movement. It's primarily because of this emphasis on becoming established as a separate entity that the given group and its founder disconnect instead of integrate the past out of which they arose. This severance, which has its basis in developmental psychology, I have coined as genealogical dissociation. Thus, when Yogananda adopted Sri Yukteswar as his guru, he was connecting with a lineage that he believed was founded by none other than Babaji, a unique avatar who defied the known laws of physics, and who was comparable to other great beings of the past, including Krishna, Buddha, and Jesus. As we will see, legitimizing one's lineage is a key factor in how a new religious movement advertises itself. This has been termed piggyback memes and is a key factor in appealing to those who've been brought up with more established religious traditions. After studying with Sri Yukteswar for a decade, Yogananda had a keen desire to visit the United States and spread the teaching of Kriya Yoga. 3 years prior to his maiden voyage, he'd established the Yogoda Satsanga in Ranchi in 1917 in order to provide an integrated and spiritual education for young boys. When he arrived in America in 1920, Yogananda's initial reason was to give a presentation to the International Congress of Religious Liberals in Boston. In this way, he was following in the footsteps of the late Swami Vivekananda, 1863 to 1902, who generated tremendous publicity and goodwill when he gave a talk at the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893, held in Chicago, Illinois. By the mid-1920s, after crisscrossing through America giving lectures and demonstrations about the health and spiritual benefits of yoga, Yogananda constructed his center in Los Angeles, California. In 1935, he created the Self-Realization Fellowship, or SRF, as a non-profit organization. Yogananda established several centers in California, including the main headquarters in Mount Washington in Los Angeles, and later the famous SRF Lake Shine in Pacific Palisades, and the Encinitas Retreat Center overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Although Yogananda had lectured to thousands of people across the country and developed an extensive mail correspondence program, it was the publication of An Autobiography of a Yogi in 1946 that made him relatively famous worldwide. This book has gone through a number of new editions and has been translated into 50 different languages. It's also been instrumental in introducing Kriya Yoga to millions and, in the process, attracting thousands of new adherents to SRF. SRF has continued to grow in popularity and today has centers, retreats and temples throughout the world, making it one of the most successful spiritual movements in the United States established in the 20th century. There are many reasons for SRF's continued success, not the least of which was Yogananda's pioneering writings on health, yoga, and righteous living. However, one of the most distinctive aspects to SRF and its teachings is how it has incorporated the teachings of Christianity and seamlessly blended them with Hinduism. This is, of course, an understandable stratagem, since America, particularly during Yogananda's tenure, is a large majority Christian nation. Introducing Hindu gods, Hindu dietary restrictions, Hindu rituals, Hindu music, Hindu dress, Hindu yogic practices and the like can be off-putting to those who are only familiar with Christian symbols and disciplines. As Yogananda explained, spiritual truth is one. Interpreted by Christians, it's called Christianity. By Hindus, Hinduism, and so forth. Narrow-minded Christians and Hindus think that true Christianity and true Hinduism mean church or temple worship, thus mistake the form for the spirit. Truth has suffered, both from narrow and even liberal interpretations. We must, however, choose the ever-widening interpretations until we reach the point where man-made interpretations no longer limit us. In looking to the core of religious mysticism, whether in Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, or in other spiritual traditions, Yogananda was presaging Aldous Huxley's 1945 comparative study, The Perennial Philosophy. Huxley argued that a close examination of the world's religions reveals an essential common element that permeates their spiritual teachings, particularly as they relate to ecstatic states of oneness. When Yogananda came to America, though he was dressed in his native dress and presented himself as a Swami initiated into the ancient order, circa 1915, he wanted to present his teachings as having fundamental commonalities with Christianity. Indeed, he went so far as to couch his Hindu teachings as universal and applicable to all human beings, regardless of caste, creed, or colour. Yogananda made sure that Jesus Christ was elevated to the same spiritual heights as other avatars and incarnations, including Babaji and Krishna. For instance, he personally arranged a sequence of photographs at the centre altar, from left to right: Lahiri Mahasaya, Mahavata Babaji, Jesus Christ, Sri Yukteswar, and himself. In such an arrangement, Yogananda was making sure that those aligned with Christian teachings would be able to see their common yogic connection. It's of interest to note here that Yogananda did not include a picture of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Arguably, this was precisely because he was not trying to appeal to a Buddhist contingency, given that they comprised much less than 1% of the American citizenry. Sean Nelson makes the observation that it's more appropriate to say that he repackaged Hinduism in an attempt to make it more appealing to Christians living under a Christian worldview. In missionary terminology, this is called contextualization. What he really did was contextualize Hinduism. Here are the basic teachings of Hinduism, along with statements from Yogananda showing that what he really embraced were Hindu beliefs. Thus, Yogananda's eclecticism is of a limited import, at least in how he tended to advertise SRF teachings throughout North America and Europe. The Swami devised a series of lessons that students could purchase to learn the ancient technique of Kriya Yoga. He was not averse to employing the latest Hollywood-styled advertising techniques to sell his teachings, and would often demonstrate various aspects of yoga in a highly dramatic fashion for the camera, even going so far as to show himself going into samadhi. Early advertisements in the 1920s and 1930s were designed to appeal to Americans interested in health, diet, and prosperity. Yogananda knew his audience well, with headlines accompanying his newspaper and magazine advertisements such as "How can you make marriage the ideal of your dreams?" "Everlasting youth," "Recharging the body battery," "Art of overcoming nervousness," "How to culture poise," "Living several hundred years in advance of your times." Later advertisements would evolve into more spiritually motivated teachings and solicit seekers interested in practicing meditation and yoga. Although it's not possible to present all of Yogananda's teachings, he did provide his own thumbnail sketch of what he was aiming to accomplish by coming to America and establishing various centers. This is nicely summarized in the following axioms: to disseminate among the nations a knowledge of definite scientific techniques for attaining direct personal experience of God. To teach that the purpose of life is the evolution through self-effort of man's limited mortal consciousness into God consciousness, and to this end to establish self-realization fellowship temples for God communion throughout the world, and to encourage the establishment of individual temples of God in the homes and in the hearts of men. To reveal the complete harmony and basic oneness of original Christianity as taught by Jesus Christ and original yoga as taught by Bhagavan Krishna, and to show that these principles of truth are the common scientific foundation of all true religions. To point out the one divine highway to which all paths of true religious beliefs eventually lead, the highway of daily scientific devotional meditation on God. To liberate man from his threefold suffering: physical disease, mental inharmonies, and spiritual ignorance. To encourage plain living and high thinking, and to spread a spirit of brotherhood among peoples by teaching the eternal basis of their unity, kinship with God. To demonstrate the superiority of mind over body, of soul over mind. To overcome evil by good, sorrow by joy, cruelty by kindness, ignorance by wisdom. To unite science and religion through realization of the unity of their underlying principles. In terms of meme theory, Yogananda's approach was to piggyback on already accepted cultural teachings and mores that allowed his exotic yogic practices to be more easily accepted, particularly with those unfamiliar with Hinduism. Because of this strategy, the SRF was able to gain successes in several major cities throughout America, whereas other fledgling movements which didn't adopt such integrative perspectives failed to garner a significant following. This should come as no surprise, since, in a competitive spiritual marketplace, it is easier to adopt new ideas if they're anchored to beliefs already held and established. Indeed, as one commentator on the early history of Yogoda Satsanga Society, YSS, later transformed into SRF, explains, the original aim was to meld the yoga tradition seamlessly with Christianity, without Christians leaving their particular sect. Yet, before SRF became firmly established, Yogananda and his organization had to weather some harsh criticism. In 1928, while touring and giving talks in Miami, Florida, Yogananda was accused of running a love cult that preyed on young women interested in yoga. In fact, a major headline on the front page of the Miami Daily News exclaimed, "East Indian Swami told to leave." According to newspaper accounts at this time, Yogananda was charging $35 per female to instruct them on the intricacies of Indian lovemaking. Apparently, irate husbands contacted authorities, and eventually Police Chief Leslie Quigg served Yogananda with peremptory orders to leave Miami. Quigg also accused Yogananda of trying to hypnotize him when they personally met, telling the Indian Swami to cut that out and listen to me. This scandal and others related to financial misappropriation eventually led to a severe schism between Yogananda and his former initiate and associate, Swami Dhirananda, a.k.a. Basukumar Bagchi, 1895 to 1977. Their falling out appears to have stemmed from allegations concerning Yogananda's purported womanizing and issues over money that was owed. Eventually, Bagchi sued Yogananda over a legally binding promissory note and eventually won his case in Los Angeles in 1936, even though the award of $8,000 was mostly used to pay legal expenses. Yogananda's countersuit against Bagchi was examined, and all money charges made by Swami Yogananda against Swami Giri Dhirananda were proven false and untrue by the presiding judge. This episode caused Yogananda much sadness, and SRF depicts it as a betrayal of trust on the part of Bagchi, despite the legal outcome. It is of interest to note that from 1934 onwards, Yogananda registered the name Self-Realization Fellowship and stopped using the Yogoda Satsanga as a description of his church. That Yogananda used the word church is indicative of his attempts to normalize and to some extent Christianize his movement. The neutral and more universal-sounding moniker Self-Realization Fellowship distinguishes its purely Indian origins and thus widens its appeal to those Americans wary of being lured into a purely Hindu cult. In early June of 1935, Yogananda embarked on his last trip to India, making a number of stopovers in England and other European countries. It appears that the object of his journey was to reunite with his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who was then in his 80s and in failing health. This was both a momentous and a tragic trip that would later be lovingly detailed in Autobiography of a Yogi. It was momentous in that not only was Yogananda reunited with Sri Yukteswar, but that his guru bestowed on him the spiritual appellation Paramahansa, a title that he would use as his first name on all his subsequent writings and publications. The tragedy, however, occurred just 3 months later, when Sri Yukteswar died, somewhat unexpectedly. Yogananda was crestfallen, since he was away visiting Kolkata at the time. Despite this, Yogananda would later claim that while staying in Mumbai for a few months, later Sri Yukteswar was resurrected from the dead and even appeared in his physical body. as Yogananda retells the glorious moment. "But is it you, Master, the same Lion of God? Are you wearing a body like the one I buried beneath the cruel Puri sands?" "Yes, my child, I am the same. This is a flesh and blood body. Though I see it as ethereal, to your sight it is physical. From the cosmic atoms I created an entirely new body, exactly like that cosmic dream physical body which you laid beneath the dream sands at Puri in your dream world. I am in truth resurrected, not on earth, but on an astral planet. Its inhabitants are better able than earthly humanity to meet my lofty standards." Jesus' bodily resurrection is a cardinal tenet in Christian churches around the world. Yogananda was well aware of this, and when he devoted a whole chapter to his guru's own resurrection, he made sure to claim that it was not merely an apparition he beheld. Indeed, Yogananda's own account is designed to convince the reader that Sri Yukteswar had physically manifested again. Thus, Yogananda's narrative concerning Sri Yukteswar's dovetails with an essential belief of millions of Christians in the United States and elsewhere. The difference, of course, is that Yogananda then overlays the narrative with wondrous details of astral heavens and hells in the Hindu context of karma and reincarnation. As such, it provides a pathway with which those brought up with Christian teachings can better understand erstwhile foreign doctrines. Those with a more jaundiced and sceptical viewpoint may see Yogananda's religious intermixing as a marketing ploy, whereas those with a more sympathetic and spiritual bent will see such as progressive eclecticism, or an attempt to interpret Hinduism using language that Christians will understand. During the late 1930s and 40s, SRF became established on a firmer economic foundation, and a number of churches were created in California and Arizona with the non-denominational and inclusive name Self-Realization Church of All Religions. In 1946, Yogananda published his autobiography, which became one of the most popular spiritual treatises in the 20th century and serves as a beacon for attracting new seekers to SRF to this day. It's become so popular, in fact, that its sales today far exceed those in decades prior. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, was so fond of the text that he made certain that everyone attending his private funeral would receive their own personal copy. George Harrison of Beatles fame felt the book was a life-changing experience. I keep stacks of autobiography of a yogi around the house, and I give it out constantly to people. When people need regrooving, I say read this, because it cuts to the heart of every religion. Paramahansa, or Paramhansa as it was later modified by SRF editors, Yogananda died of a heart attack on March 7, 1952, after attending an honorary function for Binay Arsène, ambassador from India. Much has been made by SRF about the supposed incorruptibility of Yogananda's body after death. A letter to that effect is included in every copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. The statement from Harry T. Rowe, mortuary director of Forest Lawn Memorial Park Association, recounts a fantastic tale. The absence of any visual signs of decay in the dead body of Paramhansa Yogananda offers the most extraordinary case in our experience. No physical disintegration was visible in Yogananda's body, even 20 days after death. The body was under daily observation at the mortuary from March the 11th, 1952, the day of the last public rites, until March 27th, 1952, when the bronze casket was sealed by fire. During this period, no indication of mould was visible on Yogananda's skin, and no visible desiccation or drying up took place in the bodily tissues. This state of perfect preservation of a body is, so far as we know from mortuary annals, an unparalleled one. Later, however, this remarkable testimony was questioned, as one report reveals. A heavy glass lid, as described by Mr. Rowe as being present on the casket, would prevent a great amount of air circulation, and that in itself would prevent most desiccation, so that would account for it. Far from being a demonstration of yogic powers, a phenomenal state of immutability, or a miracle through the grace of the Heavenly Father, it seems that any perception that a miracle had occurred was simply the result of misleading selections taken from a misleading letter. Regardless of how one views this post-mortem episode, one thing is certain. SRF's emphasis on Yogananda's bodily incorruptibility, even merely temporarily, aligns with earlier Roman Catholic stories concerning certain saints in its pantheon. Indeed, Catholic chroniclers of such incorruptible saints lists hundreds of names, starting with Saint Cecilia, and continuing with such notables as Saint Charles Borromeo, Saint Francis de Sales, and including even the 20th century stigmatist San Padre Pio of Petrocina. By making such a lineal connection to previous Christian saints, SRF provides its followers another touchstone with which to relate to their religious upbringing. Piggyback memes are a productive way of making an exotic and, for some, a suspicious new religion more palatable to those who may resist any idea that doesn't have a Christian correlative. This is not to suggest that Yogananda or SRF are consciously trying to manipulate the public, but only that Kriya Yoga becomes a more viable and welcome alternative if it is contextualized in ideas that are already familiar and well accepted. An American brought up as a Christian might be apprehensive entering a Hindu temple, but if Hindu ideas are couched in more universal terms, such as self-realization fellowship or church of all religions, then it eases their access. Moreover, if upon entering the Hindu temple they immediately see a painting of Jesus Christ, they cannot ignore the welcoming message. SRF has succeeded, in part, where other such movements have failed or diminished, because Yogananda was adept in couching his yogic and Hindu teaching in a format that appealed to American audiences. This included emphasizing how SRF incorporated Jesus and his teachings, providing lectures and correspondence courses that touched upon health and increasing prosperity, and promising mental and physical relief in an increasingly stressful world. In addition, Yogananda employed the latest advertising techniques and utilized a Hollywood-style showmanship which drew in thousands to his many talks. Taking a cue from the early silent films of the 1920s and later the introduction of the talkies in cinema, he gave lectures in a dramatic style, employed the latest attention-grabbing headlines for advertisements, and charged money for almost all of his activities, particularly his correspondence courses. He sought out rich patrons, such as his favoured disciple and multimillionaire James Lynn, who donated large sums of money to support his many building projects. This mimetic piggybacking allowed SRF to flourish, since Yogananda made certain his message had a universal and not a sectarian, let alone foreign, appeal. Today, Yogananda's teachings are much more well known than during his lifetime. He's become a symbol of enlightenment to millions across the globe. Even the Indian government honoured his memory in 2017 in an elaborate ceremony in which the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, paid tribute to Paramahansa Yogananda. The government issued a commemorative stamp on the 100th anniversary of the founding of Yogoda Satsanga, the predecessor to SRF. 70 years after Yogananda's death, the Self-Realization Fellowship has emerged as one of the most successful new religious movements in North America, Europe, and even Asia. In large part, this is due to successful piggybacking of cultural commonalities. 3. Trojan Horse Memes. Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, founded by John Roger Hinkins. Some new religious movements have outreach programs that, on the surface, do not appear to be religious. Instead, they emphasize secular programs and activities that can appeal to a wider audience that may only be interested in self-improvement, higher education, or a lifestyle change. However, these same outreach meetings and forums can, and often do, serve as subtle introductions to a spiritual master and his or her core teachings. In the case of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, MSIA, its founder, John Roger Hinkins, 1934 to 2014, consciously intended his Insight Transformational Seminars to act as a liaison for seekers to become better acquainted with his formative ideas. Nevertheless, most of those attending the Insight seminars didn't know of the connection it had with MSIA, since such an intimate relationship was never advertised or mentioned. This cloaking of apparent disparate organizations has been labeled a Trojan horse meme, in which the essential product is hidden or disguised within a seemingly benign self-help meeting, book, or lecture series. A good example of this mimetic camouflaging, and one that underlines how it is akin to a classic bait-and-switch, is the massive distribution of Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species by Bridge Logos, a Christian publishing company, in Altua, Florida. On the cover it reads 150th Anniversary Edition, and thus one suspects, wrongly as it will turn out, that those handing out the free copies of Darwin's magnus opus are celebrating evolution by natural selection. However, when opening the book, one discovers that it contains an introduction in large typescript by the Christian apologist Ray Comfort, which attempts to discredit everything to do with Darwin and evolution. Afterwards, the entire 1859 first edition of On the Origin of Species is reprinted, but in extremely small type, making it difficult to actually read the text. Hence, it is a literary Trojan horse that initially hides its true motivation, which in this case is to potentially convert college students to evangelical Christianity. Surprisingly, this type of informational subterfuge is more common among religions, both old and new, than one might at first suspect. This is because overt proselytizing can be viewed as both initially off-putting and non-productive. For this reason, new methods are often tried and tested out to entice those resistant to overt religious preaching. These various theological strategies run the gamut from orchestrating sports competitions to musical festivals to health fairs to couples counseling to promoting prosperity consciousness. Furthermore, new religions that partially build upon the foundations of other traditions often try to hide such influences or mask them so to ensure that their own group appears sui generis. David Christopher Lane and K. Paul Johnson, who adopted Lane's usage, have utilized the term genealogical dissociation to explain how and why founders of new religions will often cover up their prior associations with differing gurus and movements. Thus, denying one's spiritual inspirations is a way to make a teaching appear unique and innovative. It can also act as a modified version of a Trojan horse meme in that a glossy new ideology has buried within it earlier versions of the same ideas that don't get truly revealed until more information is forthcoming. John Roger Hinkins, the founder of MSIA, was a high school teacher in Rosemead, California in the mid to late 1960s. Although raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he later became interested in alternative spiritual movements, particularly Eckankar. For a short period, John Roger, affectionately called J.R., was a convener for Eckankar satsangs, spiritual gatherings, and held meetings in his home, where he'd often attempt to channel the spirit of Eckankar's founder, Paul Twitchell, and his teachings on soul travel. In 1968, however, John Roger started his own movement. 5 years earlier, J.R. alleged that after undergoing surgery he fell into a comatose state for several days, only to emerge as a transformed human being, unexpectedly learning that he'd become an anchor for the mystical traveller consciousness, MTC. Eventually, this experience and others convinced him that he could serve as a way-shower for others to find God and enlightenment. Eckankar was founded by Paul Twitchell, 1909 to 1971, in 1965, and was primarily based on Shabd Yoga, that is, listening to the inner sound current during contemplation. This is an ancient meditational technique that dates back to the early Upanishads in India. For more on Shabd Yoga, see Lane 2022. According to his own account, Twitchell was the 971st living Ek master, in a lineage that dates back through Rama in India to Gakko, who first lived on the city of Retz in Venus. Accordingly, there is a hierarchy of spiritual planes, which Ek followers must transcend in order to reach the highest lord, Sukmad. The neophyte reaches these higher regions by listening to subtler and subtler musical sounds and following inner light, all the while being guided by the present master and previous adepts in his orders, with names such as Phubi Quantz, Yabul Sakabi, and Jatak Ho. After Twitchell died, he was succeeded by Darwin Gross, 1928 to 2008, who was, to the surprise of many, excommunicated by his chosen successor, Harold Klemp, born 1942, who is the current living Ek master. John Roger Hinkins absorbed most of Eckankar's teachings and incorporated them into his own movement, MSIA, which he formally incorporated as a non-profit religious organisation in 1971, shortly before Twitchell's death. Indeed, so closely aligned are the teachings of MSIA that John Roger Hinkins at one time believed he would be chosen as the successor of Paul Twitchell after his untimely demise, going so far as to show up in Las Vegas, Nevada for the X ceremony, where the founder's wife, Gail Atkinson, introduced Darwin Gross as the next Eck master. Gail and Darwin were married shortly after this, though they eventually divorced in 1978. John Roger's emphasis on the sound current, higher planes of consciousness, levels of initiation with different mantras or tones, and the concept of a spiritually enlightened teacher dovetails with what is taught in Eckankar, Ruhani Satsang, Radhaswami, and other Shabd Yoga-related movements. JR developed distinctive nuances in MSIA, however, that distinguish it from Eckankar and the Sant tradition of Namdev, Guru Nanak, Kabir, Samad, and other Bhakti mystics. He also claims that he received the keys to the MTC from Sawan Singh, 1858 to 1948, a Radhaswami guru who established a large centre in Bias, Punjab, India. Although MSIA's cosmology, with its attendant inner sounds, is strikingly similar to Eckankar's, there are marked differences. The following analysis compares several key concepts of MSIA with Eckankar. An interesting example of how John Roger borrowed ideas from Twitchell and modified them is found in his transformation of the Eck term Sukmad, which refers to God. Although John Roger at one time also used the term Sukmad to describe the ultimate, he later altered the term after reading a Radhaswami Bias publication, which described the life and work of an obscure Indian Jewish mystic named Samad. Taking his cue from a rather out-of-the-way Bias book entitled Samad, John Roger transposed Sukmad into Samad for his MSIA publications. For instance, when referring to the divine in his book Baraka, he writes, "The silent ones who are spiritual forces issuing forth out of the Samad, the lord of the positive realms of spirit, work directly in line with the energy of the traveller in the movement of spiritual inner awareness." What we find here is an Eckankar offshoot, which tries to go further back in history, even past its predecessor, to appropriate what is seen as more original material, to transform and colour its doctrines. MSIA is perhaps the first popular eclectic Shabd yoga-based group in America, in that it incorporates Shabd yoga ideas not only from Eckankar doctrines, but also from Radhaswami ones, such as Bias's 5-name mantra, into its overall theological mix. The result is a fascinating, if confusing, potpourri of metaphysical ideas, thoroughly laced with Indian terms. While John Roger replaces Eckankar's Sukmad term with Radhaswami's Samad, there are several instances where he directly incorporates Eckankar words into his theology. For example, in Baraka, he refers to the silent ones, which is in fact an Eck term, defined in the Eckankar dictionary as agents of the Sukmad, who are in command of the great sound current. Another example, which reveals that MSIA is largely beholden to the writings of Eckankar, is the adoption of the term Baraka itself. According to the Eckankar dictionary, it means, "May the blessings be." John Roger uses this term throughout his writings, including the title of one of his books, but he defines it a bit differently than Twitchell does. Baraka, he says, is the Holy Spirit, grace, seeing the light and hearing the sound. Additionally, the Eck word Tiwaja makes its way into John Roger's material. Although he keeps the same definition as Twitchell does, namely the gaze of the master or God, John Roger changes the spelling of Tiwaja to Tiwaji. We only speculate as to why he does this. Perhaps he's simply trying to further distinguish his path from Eckankar's, which he later accomplishes to some degree, as he develops his own unique blend of Eastern and Western teachings. God worlds. An inherent aspect of Shabd yoga philosophy is the belief in inner spiritual planes. The order of these regions is considered very important, because the soul must know the right roadmap if it is to return to God successfully. The cosmologies of John Roger and Twitchell are similar, but the differences that John Roger introduces, however slight, are considered radical departures from Twitchell's version. Whereas Twitchell delineates 12 realms, not including the etheric stage, each with its own distinct sounds, John Roger only recognizes 5, with the 5th having several subdivisions. In fact, John Roger's cosmology matches in terms of numbers Radhaswami Bias's 5-plane schema, but the sounds described in Radhaswami, 1 bell, 2 thunder, 3 violin, 4 flute, 5 veena, clearly conflict with John Roger's. Thus, MSIA's picture of the spiritual realms seems to be a mix of Ekankar and Radhaswami, adopting from Ekankar a particular sequence of spiritual sounds and adopting from Radhaswami the number of spiritual dimensions. Initiation. In Radhaswami Satsang Bias, initiation is usually conducted in one ceremony. Ekankar, on the other hand, has divided its initiation into 12 levels, corresponding with each inner plane. Whereas Radhaswami Satsang Bias gives 5 names for its meditation mantra, again corresponding with the names of the 5 inner lords of the respective inner regions, Ekankar allows its initiators to choose from a list of names, which are not similar to Radhaswami's, but more closely mimicking Transcendental Meditation's list of mantras. Although he was a member of Ekankar, John Roger Hinkins decided to use the 5 names given at the Radhaswami Satsang Bias initiation. How John Roger learned of these names is unknown. It is certain, however, that he misordered the names, according to the J.R. controversy. For instance, in Radhaswami, the first name of the 5-name mantra corresponds to the Lord of the first region in Sahans Dal Kanwal. John Roger also gives the same name for his new initiates, but the names for the second and third regions are juxtaposed by John Roger. Interestingly, it appears that John Roger was unaware of the mix-up for years, assuming as he did that he was giving the same 5-name mantra that Radhaswami gurus at Bias had been giving out. John Roger, though, does not give one initiation in MSIA, like Radhaswami. Rather, like Twitchell, he gives an initiation for each of the inner planes. In MSIA's case, 5 initiations total. John Roger calls his last initiation the soul initiation. Clearly he was influenced in spacing out his initiations by his association with Ekankar. However, the changes John Roger made to Twitchell's initiation procedure, like giving a universal mantra and limiting the number of initiations, were apparently the result of his contact with Radhaswami publications. Mystical Traveller Consciousness, MTC. The central concept in Radhaswami is not charmed, as one may expect, but rather it's the idea of a living master, a guru who is directly connected to the Supreme Lord. This concept, above all others, is the one that is most pivotal to Radhaswami theology. Ekankar utilized this same idea when Twitchell coined the term living Ek Master. He also fleshed out the idea by adding the more nebulous concept of the Mahanta, the inner master, who guides Ekists on their inner journey. John Roger took over Ekankar's concept, but again developed it in ways that are unique to his ministry. John Roger coined the term the mystical traveller consciousness, most likely a transformation of Twitchell's spiritual traveller, which Twitchell got from Julian P. Johnson's With a Great Master in India, 1934. In MSIA's theology, the MTC represents the God power on earth. Followers of John Roger recognize him as the physical embodiment of the MTC. The previous holder of the MTC, we are told, was Sawan Singh of Radhaswami Satsang Bias. When discussing the role of an MTC, John Roger refers to this Radhaswami master. Those who've held the keys to the mystical traveller consciousness in the past have brought to mankind the message of love, harmony, balance, honesty and integrity. Sometimes these spiritual messages have been given directly and openly in a public way. Sometimes the mystical travellers live very quiet, ordinary lives. Some historical figures who have held the keys to the traveller consciousness are Rama, Elihu, Jesus the Christ, and Huzur Maharaj Baba Sawan Singh, who taught Sant Mat, or Teachings of the Saints. However, John Rogers' assertion that Sawan Singh was the MTC before him was not his first claim. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, John Roger declared that Rebazar Tars, the famous mentor of Ekankar, was the previous holder of the MTC. Why the switch? It could be that once John Roger broke with Ekankar, he learned more about how Ekankar was mostly derived from Radhaswami-style teachings. Thus, once he realized that Rebazar Tars was probably a cover name used by Twitchell to hide his real inspirations, John Roger opted for Sawan Singh of Bias, since he was the guru of both Kirpal Singh and Charan Singh, the two most popular Shabd yoga gurus living when John Roger started his ministry. Bypassing both Charan and Kirpal and going directly to Sawan Singh gave John Roger and his group a legitimacy in a way that Ekankar could not. Claiming that Sawan Singh was the previous MTC was John Roger's way of adding lustre and authenticity to his fledgling movement. Over time, John Roger increasingly moved his group away from Ekankar doctrines. His eclectic approach has allowed him to make MSIA open to a wide variety of influences, including LifeSpring, Est, channeling, New Age thought, crystals, massage, theosophy, and Gnostic Christianity. Even though MSIA still retains a large Ekankar influence, its evolving infrastructure allows it to grow in ways that are unpredictable, given its origin. This may well be typical of almost all Shabd yoga-related movements in the West that retain the idea that a living guru is necessary for the purity of their teachings. The living guru is in many ways a very volatile figure for any group that does not want to change. I say this because the charismatic leader has at his or her disposal what the typical CEO does not, the theological foundation to unilaterally alter teachings to suit his or her needs. Since the guru is equated with God, whatever he or she does can be condoned or justified, even actions that are contrary to previous masters. For a litany of examples, just look to the life and work of Baba Fakir Chand, Thakar Singh, Paul Twitchell, Darwin Gross, Harold Klemp, or even John Roger Hinkins. Each of them, in their own ways, have tailored their previous mentors' work to suit their particular needs. This can range from moral strictures to esoteric doctrines. It is also a modus operandi to shoehorn in erstwhile beliefs that, in a different context and format, might be unseemly and less appealing. A good example of this is how most Shabd yoga groups in India don't charge money for their teachings, whereas Ekankar and MSIA do have membership fees. Meditation. Perhaps one of the most difficult requirements to fulfill in Radhaswami is the injunction to perform 2.5 hours of meditation daily. Twitchell may have realized that his Western audience would not be amenable to such long hours of meditation, and so shortened the period to 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening, most likely getting his cue for such short periods from the success of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental meditation. John Roger Hinkins, however, trying to bridge much of Ekankar with Radhaswami, remember he uses Beas's mantra, Beas's book Samad, and Beas's guru Sawan Singh, enjoys 2 hours of spiritual exercises daily. Such a commitment of time to spiritual exercises, of course, demands a more serious student, one who's willing to sacrifice nearly 1/10 of the day to their chosen path. It may be this very requirement that has kept MSIA's membership much lower than Ekankar's, despite the fact that John Roger has had his name as co-author on several best-selling books and has had much wider exposure to the public. On the other hand, John Roger also reversed the meditation advice given in Radhaswami. Whereas in Radhaswami the meditator is supposed to repeat their 5-name mantra when encountering any lights or beings inside, in MSIA the neophyte is required to withhold the names, lest the intruding spirit capture the would-be soul. Overall, the changes from Ekankar that John Roger implements, from Mahanta to mystical traveller consciousness, from 12 initiations to 5, from 40 minutes of daily meditation to 2 hours, and so on, are significant ones. Such modifications distinguish his group enough from Metcalfe to present a seemingly new version of Shabd Yoga in America. Moreover, many who are attracted to MSIA remain unaware of its founder's intimate connection with previous spiritual groups, and how they influenced and formed much of his teachings and spiritual techniques. From the start of his ministry, John Roger and his followers published a number of books, pamphlets, tape recordings, and eventually a widely circulated newspaper. As the World Religions and Spirituality Project details, supporters of the movement began publishing a newsletter entitled On the Light Side, later named the Movement Newspaper, and today known as the New Day Herald. Students of MSIA in the 1990s receive a series of monthly discourses, lessons meant to develop in participants a soul awareness. Members are also encouraged to attend live MSIA seminars taught by either J.R. or John Morton. There are also tapes available, both on audio cassette and over the Internet, as part of the MSIA homepage. Given his background in education, he received his Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a teaching credential from the University of Utah. Given his background in education, he received his Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a teaching credential from the University of Utah. John Roger founded the University of Santa Monica in 1976 as a private school offering unaccredited degrees with a major focus on spiritual psychology and counseling. Because of its secular name and location near Santa Monica City College, USM is often confused as a public institution, lacking any religious affiliation. This has allowed John Roger to offer MSIA ideas in an educational context, but without having to make explicit certain dogmas, such as the mystical traveler consciousness, soul travel, and initiation. Because of John Roger's inclusiveness, he was able to open up avenues to other popular teachings that came to the forefront in the 1970s. Werner Erhard's seminar trainings, EST, founded in 1971, became popular throughout the country and had a marked influence on a number of similar startups that focused on maximizing human potential. Though EST had its share of controversies, including the checkered past of its founder, it sparked a whole industry that intertwined Zen philosophy, humanistic psychology, Dale Carnegie-styled entrepreneurship, and the group Mind Dynamics. Lifespring was another encounter group that was similar to EST and which was indebted to Mind Dynamics. Russell Bishop was a Lifespring trainer who branched and partnered with John Roger Hinkins to create Insight Transformational Seminars in 1978. As Mark Horn explains, Insight was based on a popular self-help seminar for young professionals called Lifespring, which employed potent psychological techniques to break down participants' entrenched thought patterns and replace them with ostensibly more positive states of mind. Although many graduates swore that Lifespring changed their lives for the better, the for-profit company was also slapped with dozens of lawsuits claiming psychological trauma and even wrongful death by suicide. One of its trainers, Russell Bishop, upset by the harshness of the Lifespring program, approached John Roger about creating a more benign version of the week-long seminar. Insight was an almost instant success, bringing in large sums of money by 1979. Peter McWilliams indicates that it had earned nearly $2 million after its first year of operation and gave John Roger oodles of new MSIA recruits. What was not so clear, however, was how Insight served as a discreet fulcrum to draw Insight graduates to the teachings of John Roger and MSIA. Much effort was made to distance Insight from MSIA, despite its symbiotic relationship. Facilitators in Insight were aligned with or members of MSIA, and in the early days received their education and training at John Roger's large ranch-style home in Manville Canyon. As McWilliams explained, in the summer of 1980, I joined 39 other facilitator wannabes for the facilitator training, aka Insight 4. We spent $1,500 each to sit in John Roger's Mandeville Canyon basement. Insight transformational seminars became much more popular than MSIA, and it brought in a tremendous amount of money with which to support various activities that John Roger wanted promoted. But if a close link between Insight, the University of Santa Monica, and MSIA was made public, it would have made John Rogers' secular outreach programs less attractive. Thus, even though both USM and Insight did eventually bring in new followers of MSIA, it did so by stealth, avoiding its religious roots. In this way, John Rogers succeeded in hiding his spiritual concepts under the guise of providing a humanistic approach to education and life-changing psychology, the classic Trojan horse. Later, the close ties that each of these organizations had with MSIA came to light when a series of investigative reports were published. This started in 1983-1984, when several close followers of John Roger Hinkins defected and publicly aired grievances against their former teacher. These included charges of sexual coercion, financial misappropriations, smear campaigns, and even death threats. The Los Angeles Times wrote an extensive two-part exposé of JR and MSIA in August of 1988. This was followed up with Washington City Paper's cover story in December 1990, which elaborated on the close but slightly hidden connection between Insight Transformational Seminars and MSIA, with a particular focus on how John Roger Hinkins and his spiritual mastership was the driving force behind both of them. In 1994, Peter McWilliams published the most elaborate examination of John Roger Hinkins, the University of Santa Monica, Insight, and other related programs. In his acerbic critique, Life 102, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You, McWilliams, who once co-authored several best-selling books with John Roger Hinkins, provided an insider's look at the evolution of MSIA and its related organizations. The book clearly showed how Insight and the University of Santa Monica acted as secular attractions, which, step by step, introduced JR's overall theological purview, but in a cloaked and benign fashion. As the book reveals, I wrote You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought as though John Roger and I had written it together. His previous books, which he didn't write either, had been mostly spiritual. This, as far as Insight was concerned, would not do. They were desperately trying to debunk the myth, read truth, that Insight was a recruitment arm for John Rogers' Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness. According to McWilliams and other former members, Insight was a classic bait-and-switch operation, designed to lure new recruits by offering them what appeared at first glance benevolent and secular teachings. McWilliams goes on to explain that Insight was delivered as any popular training seminar on the market, but that was just a sale, the bait. Beneath it, Insight was there to get people into MSIA. Life 102 presents a classic case study of precisely how a Trojan horse meme works, by creating a panoply of organizations that deceptively contain within them a detailed religious theology. In the case of MSIA, John Roger was the closest thing to God, on par with Jesus, Buddha, and other spiritual luminaries. But this teaching was withheld from neophytes in the system. Even today, long after John Rogers' death from pneumonia in 2014, MSIA, the University of Santa Monica, and Insight Transformational Seminars operate as if they are completely different organizations. Yet the current leader of MSIA and JR's chosen successor, John Morton, is listed as being deeply involved in all related organizations. As his official biography states, in addition to serving as spiritual director for MSIA, John currently serves as spiritual director in several other organizations, many of them founded by John Roger, including Peace Theological Seminary and College of Philosophy, Heartfelt Foundation, Institute for Individual and World Peace, Insight Seminars, and the Educare Foundation. He serves on the boards of Insight and the University of Santa Monica, where he also serves as Chancellor. While today the connection between MSIA and all its related organizations are much more well known, during his lifetime John Roger Hinkins strenuously tried to shield the intimate relationship of each. Although he didn't succeed in his endeavor, JR's efforts represent how a Trojan horse meme works in a religious context. 4. Mimetic distribution. God's direct contact. Kuan Yin, founded by Qing Hai. The central idea of meme theory reflects the fundamental insights of Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace that evolution by natural selection is driven by differential reproduction. Produce more viable offspring than one's competitor, and over time those genes will influence the phenotypes of future generations. But the caveat is that each generation must continue the lineal descent, since otherwise those unique DNA configurations will become extinct. Likewise, memes do not exist in a vacuum, but must be robustly propagated in order to survive and flourish. A religion that proselytizes for new recruits has a better chance of spreading its ideology than one that discourages evangelization. Thus, distributive memes, like their genetic biological counterparts, must find avenues which make them both easily accessible and attractive. Originally, this was done orally and then by print and then by electromagnetic means, such as telegraphy, and today the Internet. But there are a variety of other means as well, including spreading ideas through food services. A good illustration of this can be found in Qinghai's organization sponsoring vegan-exclusive restaurants throughout the world. Loving Huts, as most of the cafes are called, is the most successful and popular all-plant-based franchise in the world. Each of them, without exception, carry information about Qinghai as the supreme master through her many books and continual televised broadcasts of her message. In the Shabd yoga tradition, there are very few female gurus. Qinghai, born Trindang Hui, May 12, 1950, founder of the God's Direct Contact Organization and a champion of Kuan Yin meditation, is an exception. Born in the Quang Ngai province in Vietnam, Qinghai was raised Roman Catholic and was taught the rudiments of Buddhism. Eric Lai has written the most detailed biography of Qinghai's life, which is at odds with her own sanctioned biography. According to Lai's spiritual messiah out of Taiwan, Qinghai had a daughter with an unnamed American soldier who later committed suicide at the age of 20. Qinghai eventually married a German doctor whom she met at the age of 19, after which she temporarily settled in Germany. According to Lai, it was in 1979 that Qing began a 3-year tutelage under a Buddhist monk. Because of her gender, however, she wasn't allowed into monastic life. Lai reports that, in Taiwan in 1983, Trin studied with a Buddhist nun named Xin Jing. Unaware of her association with Xing, Xin Jing officially ordained Trin in the order and gave her the religious name Qinghai, which translates from Mandarin as pure ocean. When Qinghai moved to Queens in New York in 1984, she started teaching meditation classes along Buddhist lines, but within 2 years began emphasizing Shabd yoga instead. She had learned this practice from Thakur Singh, 1929 to 2005, one of the claimed successors of Kirpal Singh, founder of Ruhani Satsang in Delhi, India, who taught a threefold technique of Simran, repetition of 5 sacred names, Dhyan, contemplation of the inner light at the third eye center, and Bhajan, listening to the inner sound current. By 1986, she went to Taiwan, and it was during this time period that she began her own ministry, where Lai claims that Qinghai lured followers away from her former master, Xing Jing, and set up a makeshift temple in an apartment in the Taipei suburbs. Within a year of her arrival, Qinghai, with the appellation Suma, had established herself as a spiritual master in her own right, and she began attracting an increasing number of followers. Prior to coming out as a self-appointed guru, Qinghai worked as one of Thakur's representatives for a short period, but later broke off and tried to deny her connection to him when she founded her own movement. Today, Qinghai claims she took final initiation from a Himalayan guru she names as Kudaji. Despite repeated efforts to get more information about this mysterious sage, neither Qinghai nor her followers are forthcoming. Given the very close parallels of her group with Thakur Singh's Kirpal Light Satsang, particularly her use of the same spiritual diary that Thakur adopted from his own guru, it appears that Qinghai's use of the name Kudaji is a cover to hide the real inspiration for forming God's direct organization. Indeed, Her requirements for initiation are similar to those required in other Sant-Mat groups, except that she has 5 precepts as opposed to 4 vows. 1. Refrain from taking the life of sentient beings. This precept requires strict adherence to a vegan or lacto-vegetarian diet. No meat, fish, poultry or eggs, fertilized or non-fertilized. 2. Refrain from speaking what is not true. 3. Refrain from taking what is not yours. 4. Refrain from sexual misconduct. 5. Refrain from using intoxicants. This includes avoiding all poisons of any kind, such as alcohol, drugs, tobacco, gambling, pornography, and excessively violent films or literature. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Ching Hai's ministry is how closely her spiritual diary parallels the one used by Thakur Singh and his guru, Kirpal Singh, who first created it. The only difference in Ching Hai's spiritual diary and the one created by Kirpal Singh and used by Thakur Singh is that in 2 places she adds 2 distinctive terms. Under length of time, she adds Quan Guan and later Quan Yin. Otherwise, they're identical. Indeed, the very layouts are exactly the same, providing for 31 days in each diary form. Ching Hai also speaks about a spiritual merit system replete with its own point tallies. A close look at the chart provides insight into what is given high value and that which can earn demerits. Earning more spiritual merit points means that one can eliminate karma and ascend higher in meditation. Losing points means one has added more karma and more burden to one's inner quest. The following list is a selection taken from a talk Ching Hai gave in English in the summer of 2010 during a video conference in Los Angeles, California. The following is just a brief glimpse of the overall tally system, since it is quite extensive. Shopping and eating. Go out shopping, minus 200 points. Go to a meat-eating restaurant, minus 300 points. Gossiping or expressing anger. Talk bad about other people, minus 500 points. Talk about the weather or anything, no harming or bad intention to anyone, minus 200 points. Cleaning and washing clothes. Clean house for an enlightened master, plus 20,000 points per year. Wash clothes for enlightened master, plus 5,000 points per year. Watching TV or movies. Watch bad and violent TV or movie, minus 300 points per hour. Watch 1 hour of Supreme Master TV, plus 800 points per hour. Killing. Kill 1 adult, minus 1 billion to minus 4 billion points. Kill 1 animal or 1 bird, minus 800,000 to minus 3 million points, depends on the size and so on. Destroying or polluting the environment. Cut or destroy 1 normal adult tree, minus 100,000 to 500,000 points. Cause 1 cubic meter of water pollution. Cause illness or death to people, minus 100,000 to minus 400,000 points. Meditation. Disciples meditating with Supreme Master Ching Hai, plus 300,000 points per hour. Supreme Master Ching Hai touches one of the disciples, minus 100 points Master, plus 1,000 points Disciple. With Ching Hai, we see yet another form of genealogical dissociation, which has also happened in Ekankar, MSIA, and other Shabd yoga-related groups. There may be a variety of reasons for why she's chosen to do this, including the fact that her initiating guru, Thakur Singh, did not commission her to start a break-off satsang. Terry Lenzner, an investigator for the United States Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, suggests that she denied her Sant-Mat connection because Ching Hai wanted to be ordained as a Buddhist monk in Taiwan, though this explanation seems questionable. In 1988, a major scandal erupted over the treatment of American women and the exploitation of young children by Thakur Singh. Apparently, he had forced them to be blindfolded and made them meditate several hours a day. Qing Hai broke off from Thakur after the scandal broke in Germany and the United States. This may have prompted Qing Hai to hide her connection with him. It is significant that in the late 1980s, Thakur Singh was promoting a vegan lifestyle, eschewing all animal products, in contrast to other Sant Mat gurus who only emphasized a vegetarian diet that included milk and cheese but no eggs. This too appears to have influenced Qing Hai and may have led to her promoting veganism worldwide. Qing Hai has been remarkably successful in a short period of time, given that she essentially founded the organization on her own and was not formally affiliated with any Shabd yoga movement in India. She did align herself initially with Buddhism while living in Taiwan, and even dressed as a simple Buddhist monk with very short-cut hair. Later, she severed her affiliation with formal Buddhist schools and established her own unique lineage, alleging that she was taught the method of Kuan Yin from Kuraji. Kuan Yin is Qing Hai's term for what is essentially Shabd yoga, as she learned it from Thakur Singh, who learned it from his own master, Kirpal Singh, 1898 to 1974. The term itself, however, means a compassionate bodhisattva. Qing Hai co-opted the term and gave it her own stylized definition for listening to the inner sound current. One of the distinguishing innovations that Kirpal introduced, and which he widely advertised as legitimizing his mastership, was that anyone who he initiated would have a direct experience of light or sound at the time of initiation. Each of the most well-known successors of Kirpal Singh, such as Ajaib Singh, Darshan Singh, and Thakur Singh, also claimed that they too could give an inner experience at the time of initiation. Qing Hai has also followed this protocol, which aligns her teachings with her one-time but unacknowledged guru. As the official Qing Hai website explains, the Supreme Master Qing Hai provides the spiritual transmission. This first taste of divine presence is given in silence. The Supreme Master Qing Hai need not be physically present in order to open this door for you. The transmission is an essential part of the method. The techniques themselves will bring little benefit without the grace of the Master. Because you may hear the inner sound and see the inner light immediately upon initiation, this event is sometimes referred to as sudden or immediate enlightenment. Like other Radhaswami and Sant-Mat groups, Qing Hai does not charge money for initiation or membership, although she does accept donations. The latter have made her organization very well funded. Because Qing Hai was brought up in Southeast Asia and is conversant with the languages spoken in Taiwan, Vietnam, and elsewhere, the vast majority of her initiates are from these countries and those affiliated with them. The growth of her movement is quite remarkable. She became successful and well known within a very short period of time, even garnering unwanted publicity by the mid-1990s because followers in her organization had donated over $600,000 to then-President Bill Clinton's Legal Expense Trust. This generated a major uproar when it was first reported by the Washington Post and other major news outlets. Due to the questionable sources of such donations, primarily foreign donations, the monies were eventually returned. Today, Qing Hai's religious movement has hundreds of centers throughout the world, including Africa, North and South America, Europe, Asia, and even Oceania. Most commonly referred to as the Supreme Master, Qing Hai also has an extensive internet presence with daily broadcasts preaching her message of meditation, world peace, and veganism. It is Qing Hai's promotion of veganism worldwide that has served as the major beacon for attracting new followers to her God's Direct Contact organization. This has been done by creating more than 200 restaurants scattered across 35 different countries, each of which only serve vegan food and which promote the spiritual teaching of the Supreme Master and her meditational method of Kuan Yin. Vegan-only restaurants attract those interested in plant-based food to visit loving huts. By doing so, potential converts get exposed, even if unwillingly, to God's direct contact. As one chooses from a variety of Asian-inspired meals, from mi goreng to pad thai to kung pao wow, they will see a variety of posters promoting veganism and programs for meditation. A television may be on, set to a channel devoted exclusively to all things related to Qing Hai and her ministry. This is proselytizing through a full stomach. Providing food in a religious context has a long history, and has served as a way to introduce neophytes to a system of beliefs that may at first seem exotic or foreign. Christian missionaries are adept in spreading the gospel through food. In Sikhism, the open langar, free kitchen, is ubiquitous, where anyone who visits the Gurdwara is given a free meal. Usually the visitor will first enter the sacred grounds and perhaps even hear a Pathi chant or read from the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, and then partake of prasad, blessed food, and then sit with the others for a meal. In this way, one learns of the Sikh religion within an enriching context that doesn't rely on pressure tactics. Likewise, the hundreds of loving huts serve as welcoming cafes for both initiates of Qinghai to gather and talk about the teachings, as well as operating as a drawing card to the Kuan Yin technique of meditation. Usually, at such establishments, one can learn of the 5 core precepts that are elemental in the teachings of the God Direct Contact organization. Moreover, many loving huts provide free literature that's usually located right next to the menus. This way, one can enjoy a tasty meal and also read about Qinghai's spiritual views. In addition, God's Direct Contact organization constantly updates its various websites, which also offer the latest books by their Supreme Master that can be downloaded for free as PDFs. As one web-based advertisement puts it, the e-book is complete. Just download and run. Sit back and enjoy Master Qinghai's responses to hundreds of questions. As an extra bonus, listen to Master Qinghai's interview with Cape Town talk show host and be the first to see 2 new photos of Master. Nothing extra is needed to read the newest additions to Master's diverse array of media, the e-book. For any idea or meme to be successful, it must be vigorously passed on. The more one believes in the message of a certain guru, prophet or teacher, the more one is inclined to be active in promoting them in any way possible. Gideon's International, founded in 1899, is a classic example of how a group of like-minded individuals, firm in their Christian beliefs that the message of Jesus Christ needs to be spread to as many people as possible, spearheaded a worldwide project to place free copies of the Bible wherever possible. Thus, in many motels and hotels across the United States, one can find a Gideon-sponsored New and Old Testament in English. These are usually in hardback and placed in a drawer near the bed or in a work desk. Millions of such copies have been produced, and in most college campuses in North America, there are Christians who will pass out little paperback versions of the New Testament free of charge. Hence, even if one is not at all interested in converting to Christianity, they nevertheless have the opportunity to learn something about it. In the latter part of the 1960s and the early part of the 1970s, the Hare Krishna movement, as founded by Swami Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, encouraged its devotees to hand out free literature, usually the Bhagavad Gita, at airports, bus stops, train stations, or other places where travellers were in a rush. While the Hare Krishna were not very successful in garnering a large number of new converts, the membership has always been relatively small, they did nevertheless introduce thousands, even millions, to their Hindu-inspired religion. A vast majority of Americans became aware of the Hare Krishnas, even if they never joined the group. Qinghai's God Direct Contact organization, while not overtly proselytizing like Christians or the Hare Krishnas, is not shy about promoting its teachings by offering free literature at its Loving Hut restaurants. Because the food is plant-based and relatively inexpensive and unique, it does set a conducive atmosphere to make Qinghai's teachings much more appealing, particularly because they so strongly advocate for peace and animal welfare. While God's Direct Contact certainly advertises and promotes the teachings of Qinghai, it is most vocal and pressing about its mission of saving animals and promoting a worldwide awakening to veganism. Qinghai has even gone so far as to enrobe her vegan message with a messianic fervour, threatening meat-eaters with a delay in entering heaven and foretelling global catastrophes. In a speech entitled Last Call to Turn Vegan and Repent Sincerely, the Supreme Master warned, "Please be careful now. You have to turn vegan now to protect yourself. And I want to say to everybody, this is my last offer, last call. If you turn vegan and repent sincerely, I will really take you to heaven, guaranteed, within 6 months from today. It's the last call. I won't be allowed to do much more than that. After this last call, without initiation, it will not be guaranteed for just anyone. You'll have to try harder, fending for yourself. Qinghai's spiritual message is intimately interlaced with her advocacy of veganism. Because of this, she can vigorously push for initiates and non-initiates to change their lifestyle, while at the same time include messages about her own mastership and the greatness of the Kuan Yin method. According to Susan Blackmore, ideas are more easily passed on if they are bounded in a larger memeplex, which helps support and defend a new or isolated meme. Qinghai's spiritual message gets passed on more easily to those who might be wary of her godlike claims because of her advocacy of veganism. Most non-initiates go to Loving Hut restaurants and others sponsored by God's Direct Contact organization because of the food. Thus, Qinghai casts a much wider net for her teachings than would otherwise be possible. The fact is that by eating at Loving Huts, one invariably learns of God's direct contact and the spiritual message of the 5 precepts as taught by the Supreme Master. In other words, the desire to eat vegan outweighs whatever qualms one may have with the religion being preached. Eating delicious food establishes the right mood and context with which to imbibe alternative spiritual teachings. Accordingly, Qinghai's message becomes mimetically amplified. 5. ISKCON, founded by Swami Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada. In popular music, it is a truism that certain songs become remembered not so much because they're liked, but because they have a hook or a lyric that plays over and over in our minds. Try as we might, the pattern keeps repeating itself, even if we try our utmost to forget it. Such songs work as quasi-mantras, boring a groove in our consciousness, so that it actually takes effort or a distraction to dislodge them from memory. These are infectious memes, which work primarily because they're simple and, for reasons not fully understood, easily contagious. These types of songs have been termed as earworms, and neurologists who've been studying the phenomenon for some time have developed a host of possible explanations. Earworms can occur due to the brain's attempt to fill a gap in the auditory cortex, which is located in the temporal lobe. When you hear a song over and over, the brain transmits that sound information to the phonological loop, a short-term memory system in the auditory cortex. Earworms can be caused or triggered by the most recent song you listen to, a song or tune listened to repeatedly, a song listened to during a period of stress, or a song that connects to past events or memories. Kelly Jakubowski, a music psychologist who's done extensive research in the field of earworms, argues that earworms are usually tunes that have a fairly generic and easy-to-remember melody. In terms of mimetic theory, this also applies to religious ideas, particularly those that are effortless to remember and may be coupled with a unique melody or rhyming scheme. If the meme is believed to be a method by which to connect with the divine, then it has the added appeal of being highly valued. This can be seen in Orthodox Christianity, where the Jesus prayer has become especially popular, and which is also regarded as a powerful way to connect with God. There are a few slight variations, but the most common prayer is the one mentioned in the book The Way of a Pilgrim, where, after a long and arduous search to learn how to pray without ceasing, the wandering neophyte learns from an enlightened starets to repeat, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me." Once the pilgrim is instructed in the phrase, he begins to repeat it so often that even in dreams he hears its repetition. In Indian spiritual traditions, much has been made about sacred sounds and words, particularly Om or Aum, which is considered to be not only a symbol for the ultimate reality, but also an efficacious mantra that through continual recital brings one closer to the divine. Arguably, if a new religious movement is too complex or requires too many prerequisites to join, it will limit its base. Conversely, requiring a would-be follower to go through such a gauntlet may in turn make them more committed to that particular path, since they've invested so much of their time, and perhaps money, to the cause. Some religions, however, are exceptionally easy to become part of, but because of such ease, they're just as easy to drop out of. There is often a much larger drop-out rate than with those movements, that have a hierarchy of strictures. Thus, according to some forms of evangelical Christianity, all one has to do to become a Christian is sincerely accept Jesus Christ as one's Lord and Saviour, and that he died for their sins and resurrected bodily from the dead. Genuinely accept that, and one can become a born-again Christian in less than a minute. It's little wonder, given such simplicity, regardless of whether it has eternal consequences or not, that millions regard themselves as Christian, despite not knowing the specifics of their own belief system or its attendant theology. In contrast, certain sects of Judaism and Jainism have comparatively small followings, despite predating Christianity by centuries, precisely because they have much more stringent obligations, such as dietary requirements for those who wish to become followers. Yet those that do meet and follow those rules tend to stay with their chosen religion and become more reluctant to leave the fold. It is important to make a distinction between easy and hard conversions. It should therefore come as no surprise that new religions that are easily understandable and can be explained in simple terms will become more widely known, even if their core membership doesn't dramatically grow. The Hare Krishna movement is a good example of how a new religion can be widely known but fails to garner a large following commensurate with its fame. In this section, we want to better understand how this group evolved from its humble beginnings in the 1960s and how it best exemplifies mimetic simplicity, in which a chant, which embodies a deeper theology, can go viral worldwide. The founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, was A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, 1896 to 1977, who travelled to New York City after passage of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which eliminated quotas for foreigners wishing to visit the United States. His motive was to spread the teachings of the Hindu holy man Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, 1486 to 1534, who emphasized devotion and worship of Krishna. In Hinduism, Krishna is regarded as an avatar of Vishnu and the very embodiment of God. He is a key figure in several Hindu scriptures, but most notably in the Bhagavad Gita, where he serves as a guide and mentor to Arjuna. After meeting his guru and spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, 1874 to 1937, in Prayagraj, and a decade later taking formal instructions from him, Swami Prabhupada was instructed to spread the teachings of Krishna to the English-speaking world. In the 1940s, he founded Back to Godhead magazine, and throughout the 1950s wrote many articles and a book extolling the virtues and teachings of Lord Krishna and Hindu Dharma. One of the central elements in propagating the teachings of his spiritual ancestors, but particularly those aligned with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, can be found in the Kali Santarana Upanishad, written in Sanskrit and reportedly dating back to the early 6th century CE. The translated text in English is fewer than 600 words, but is remarkably clear and succinct in explaining how one can achieve liberation, moksha. It is through the mere recitation of the names of the primeval personality of Godhead, Lord Narayana, that one transcends the evil effects of the Kali Yuga. When Narada asks, "What are those names?" Brahma, Hiranyagapa, replies, "Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare." These 16 simple words are only slightly altered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, swapping the first set from Hare Rama to Hare Krishna, as in Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mimetically, this mantra distills the essence of the Kali Santarana Upanishad in a memorable phrase that can be learned within minutes and then repeated for a lifetime, echoing precisely the Hindu ideal of always remembering God whenever possible. It is therefore not surprising that any new religious movement that can create a short but indelible phrase that encapsulates their teachings will have a much easier time becoming well known within a relatively short period of time, even if it doesn't necessarily by itself lead to a dramatic increase in devotees. When Swami Prabhupada came to America, he didn't have much money or the sponsorship of a large organization. However, what he did possess was a deep knowledge of Hinduism and an abiding passion to teach Westerners the efficacy of following Krishna in their lives and adopting a lifestyle that reflected such a transformation in thinking. For those raised in Christianity, where devotion to Jesus was central, the idea of bhakti yoga was not a foreign practice. However, replacing Christ with Krishna presented a greater difficulty. According to one of the earliest accounts, there was a fundamental disagreement between Swami Prabhupada and his Indian host, Dr. Ramamurti S. Mishra, over how to best reach the divine. The stark difference in their respective approaches gives a clear glimpse of Swami Prabhupada's theological outlook. As the Swami remembers, "I used to sit in the back and listen to his meetings silently. He was speaking all impersonal nonsense, but I kept my silence. Then one day he asked if I would like to speak, and I spoke about Krishna, consciousness. I challenged that he was speaking manufactured philosophy and all nonsense from Sankarakaya. He tried to back out and said it was not him who was speaking, but Sankarakaya. I said, 'You're representing him. That's the same thing.' He said to me, 'Swamiji, I like you very much, but you cannot speak here.' But although our philosophies differed and he would not let me speak, he was kind and I was nice to him." The conflict between saguna, form, and nirguna, formless, approaches to the divine has a long history in India and has led to a number of differing movements emphasizing one over the other. Some traditions enjoin both, viewing them as not mutually exclusive. Despite their differences, Mishra invited Prabhupada to his ashram, and during this time the Swami continued writing on Srimad Bhagavatam manuscripts and would on occasion lead kirtan, worship or chanting sessions, repeating Krishna's name at some of the services. Though Mishra admired Prabhupada's simple devotional nature, his mastery of Indian cooking, and his persistence, he was at odds with his saguna, love of form approach to the divine. Mishra was, in the words of Prabhupada, an impersonalist Swami. In the latter part of 1965 and early 1966, the Swami began to preach more publicly. He would often take a small bongo drum and sit under a tree in a public park to chant the holy names of Krishna. Curious onlookers would gather. Some joined in the chanting. Some began to take an active interest in his mission. At Tompkins Square Park, the Swami began weekly chanting sessions, where he would lead others in chanting and praising Krishna. In addition, Swami Prabhupada offered classes on the Bhagavad Gita and often provide detailed commentary on various passages, focusing on their spiritual messages and the lessons that could be drawn from them. Swami Prabhupada then established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, in 1966, with a stated ambition of developing centres around the world. Although he was 69 years old and suffered from a heart condition, the Swami was tireless in his efforts to spread the message of Krishna. To this end, he translated more than 40 volumes of the great classics of Krishna conscious literature from Sanskrit into English, giving elaborate commentaries synthesizing the realizations of previous masters along with his own. These books include Bhagavad Gita as it is, the definitive presentation of Lord Krishna's teachings, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavata Purana, the 18-volume history of Lord Krishna's incarnations, pastimes and devotees, and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, the 9-volume biography and teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Undoubtedly, the Swami's diligence, passion and organizational skills made ISKCON well known within just a few years. The singular appeal of his message, though, was that it revolved around a very simple phrase, which promised enormous benefits. The chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, became a clarion call for seekers to forget their troubles and worries and lose themselves in devotion to God. Moreover, this chant was often accompanied by devotees who danced and played musical instruments that gave it a melodic quality, often entrancing bystanders in its repetition. The Swami's first formal initiation of Western disciples took place on September the 9th, 1965. It was a simple ceremony that followed a Vedic sacrifice in one of the rooms of Swami Prabhupada's residence. There were only a few young men, and some were naive about the requirements of being formally initiated by Swami. These included taking lifetime vows of no meat-eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, and no gambling, which were mandatory for all disciples. From this humble beginning, the movement grew geometrically. By the 1970s, the organization of ISKCON became solidified, with temples being erected in major American cities and restaurants opened that served vegetarian food, usually near or on the center's grounds. Eventually, initiates in the movement shaved their heads and donned ochre-coloured robes, indicating renunciation of worldly values and commitment to Krishna as the central focus of their life. These outward symbols made the Hare Krishnas stand out in the late 1960s and 1970s, especially when travelling in a group and chanting and dancing to the famous chant from the Kali Santarana Upanishad. Often these travelling devotees would pass out copies of the Bhagavad Gita that Swami had translated with his own commentary, invariably asking for a donation to continue their cause. These Krishna devotees commenced a grassroots campaign for their teaching by chanting, dancing, and sharing literature in the public square. 4 distinct characteristics stood out that were readily noticeable to any onlooker. First, most Krishna followers dressed in Indian outfits, usually ochre in colour. Second, many of the males had shaved heads, with one tuft of hair left on the back top of their heads. Third, devotees sang the Kali Santarana Upanishad, or some variation thereof, in an ecstatic fashion. Finally, followers of Krishna usually danced, and some brought musical instruments with them, such as small drums or hand cymbals. Since these bands of devotees were enthusiastic in their parades down busy city streets in Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and elsewhere, they became a tourist attraction in themselves, even if occasionally mocked or harassed. Yet, despite whatever difficulties or criticism they confronted, the ISKCON members made their message known: chant Hare Krishna and follow him for spiritual enlightenment. Because of its utter simplicity, it was an infectious campaign, and widely successful in spreading the message of Krishna consciousness. The downside of this type of proselytization, given its simplicity, is that it also got easily misunderstood and mocked, particularly in the popular media, which viewed ISKCON as an aberrant cult. This also happened, but perhaps to a lesser degree, with the Jesus movement of the 1970s, where a group of erstwhile hippies began spreading the message of the gospel in unorthodox ways, becoming known as Jesus freaks. Simple memes or relatively digestible ideas can be easily transmissible, but at the same time can just as easily be criticized and marginalized by those who deem them a threat or socially unacceptable. ISKCON grew relatively unscathed for a few years, given its novelty, and also because it brought a message of peace at a very turbulent time in America, which was fighting an unpopular war in Vietnam, battling racial inequality, and facing general malaise about pre-established societal norms. Within a few years, however, the Hare Krishna movement faced an increasingly hostile environment, primarily because some saw it as a cult that was luring young men and women away from their families. This accelerated when the founder of ISKCON died at the age of 82. A few months prior to his death, on July 7, 1977, Swami Prabhupada issued an edict commissioning 11 of his senior disciples to act as Ritviks, representatives of the Acharya, for the purpose of performing initiations, both first initiation and second initiation. These 11 were to be regarded as disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. While at the beginning this arrangement appeared to be in accordance with Swami's wishes, the results after his death were anything but. This is not unusual, since succession disputes after an esteemed guru dies are fraught with dangers, primarily because certain disciples tend to jockey for positions of power and then challenge others attempting to do the same. Moreover, not everyone agrees about how best to continue the teachings and what organizational changes should be made. But what happened after Swami's departure turned uglier much more quickly than was expected. There are several reasons for this, but appointing 11, and not just one clearly favoured successor, was bound to generate controversies. Ironically, it was Swami himself who, though speaking at the failure of Gaudiya Matha earlier, gave clear indications of how religious institutions fail. Out of the 11 representatives, 8 of them failed in their ministries because of personal scandals, misappropriation of funds, or worse. As Tamal Krishna Maharaja, one of the 11 zonal Acharyas, is recorded as saying just a few years after Swami's death, actually, Prabhupada never appointed any gurus. He appointed 11 Ritviks. He never appointed them gurus. Myself and the other GBC, Governing Body Commission, have done the greatest disservice to this movement the last 3 years because we interpreted the appointment of Ritviks as the appointment of gurus. You cannot show me anything on tape or in writing where Prabhupada says, I appoint these 11 as gurus. It does not exist because he never appointed any gurus. This is a myth. The oft-cited cliché, power corrupts absolutely, part of which is attributed to the 19th century historian Lord Acton, is best epitomized in religious communities where the leader is often equated with being the incarnation of God. Tales of massive abuse and corruption in some segments of the Hare Krishna movement has led to a number of tell-all books that make for harrowing and disturbing reading, including the 1988 expose Monkey on Stick. Kirtanananda Swami, a.k.a. Keith Gordon Ham, 1937 to 2011, was one of the most prominent of the 11 representatives appointed by Swami Prabhupada. During his guru's lifetime, Kirtananandan was responsible for organizing and building a large center, known as New Vrindaban, in West Virginia. The express purpose of the community was to engage in cow protection and local agriculture, simple living, holy pilgrimage, spiritual education, and above all, loving Krishna. After Swami's death, Kirtanananda established himself as a superior guru in his own right and attempted to make Krishna consciousness more appealing to a Western audience by chanting in English and allowing women to spread the message on their own. However, in 1990, the US federal government indicted Kirtanananda on 5 counts of racketeering, 6 counts of mail fraud, and conspiracy to murder 2 of his opponents in the Hare Krishna movement, Stephen Bryant and Charles Saint-Denis. The government claimed that he had illegally amassed a profit of more than $10.5 million over 4 years. It also charged that he ordered the killings because the victims had threatened to reveal his sexual abuse of minors. The murder charges against Kirtanananda were eventually dismissed, but later he pleaded guilty of mail fraud and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 2000, after a 1.5-year investigation, the ISKCON Child Protection Office, established because so many reports of spousal and underage abuse, determined that Kirtanananda had molested 2 boys. He was prohibited from visiting any ISKCON properties for 5 years and offered conditions for reinstatement within ISKCON that included providing restitution, writing letters of apology to his victims, expressing remorse, and offering to make amends to victims. Other leaders in the organization faced a series of controversies as well, particularly relating to the systematic abuse of children and claims of kidnapping. Eventually, ISKCON settled many of the outstanding legal cases against it and attempted to purify its soiled reputation in the press by developing safeguards for the safety of children and spouses. Today, it's rare to see Hare Krishnas passing out literature or even chanting and dancing in the streets, although it is roughly estimated that there are more than 1 million followers of the religion worldwide. The number of American devotees has dwindled considerably since its heyday in the 1970s. As Max Weber pointed out in his studies on charismatic leadership and the resulting aftermath that transpires after a leader dies, ISKCON has become more conservative in its self-presentation. The unbridled and ecstatic charisma of its earlier days has become, to echo Weber, routinized and organized, even somewhat bureaucratic. Yet, despite all the ups and downs within the movement for the past 5 decades, Swami Prabhupada's core ideas remain, and the Hare Krishna chant has become one of the most successful religious memes to ever spread from India to America. Indeed, during the 1970s, it became a key element of George Harrison's most famous song, My Sweet Lord. My Lord. The song is still consistently played on various music outlets around the globe. While ISKCON may not be as well known today, the Hare Krishna chant, slightly modified from the original Kali Santarana Upanishad, lives on and is still recited and heard by millions. Accordingly, it exemplifies precisely how a simple meme or idea can be passed and absorbed quickly across different cultural landscapes, even to those who may not know its ultimate meaning or significance. 6. Mimetic incentives. Calvary Chapel founded by Chuck Smith. The two basic drives in human beings, according to Sigmund Freud, are eros and thanatos, the desire for life, love, pleasure, and the fear of decay, destruction, and death. Between these two opposing forces, human beings navigate their short existence, yearning for eros, but always on the watch for thanatos. Freud's idea isn't new, since the biological imperatives of existence that we are genetically predisposed to optimize whatever allows us to survive long enough to pass on our unique DNA. To do this, we tend to move towards that which sustains life, and avoid that which damages or terminates it. Hence, it's not surprising that one of the most incisive ways of making sure an idea gets transmitted and then replicated is to entice a recipient with a pleasurable reward. But this is only half of the equation, since desires are multifarious. What is perhaps even more powerful is to invoke fear in the receiver, so that he or she worries about the dreadful consequences if they refuse to accept the specific ideology, and encourage its spreading. One example of this dualist push and pull are chain letters. Usually such spam emails are bookended by offering the subject a reward if we're willing to pass on the information to several others in our contact list. Or, if we refuse to do so, something tragic may happen to us in a few days. The whole point of a chain letter is differential replicating success, similar structurally to how evolution by natural selection works. That such letters are almost invariably untrue is beside the point. Yet, to the degree that we believe the content to be true, it will provoke us to do exactly what the chain letter demands, thus ensuring its geometric growth. Thus we can easily see that the popularity of a new religion may have absolutely nothing to do with its truth value or its ideological strengths. Rather, its popularity can be due to how well its ideas can propagate amongst human hosts. Some ideas, even though true, just don't replicate well, and will, due to that deficiency, die out. Therefore, the real reason some religions gain millions of followers, while others die out, is due to factors that have nothing to do with God or truth. In a Darwinian fashion, therefore, the survival of the fittest doesn't translate as biggest, or strongest, or most honest, or truest. It translates as this: whatever ideas can survive a given environment and successfully make copies that, in turn, can do the same, will win out. Those ideas that cannot pass this test, and keep in mind that this test says nothing about truth, will, by the very nature of the game, fail and die out. So, like genes, memes are selfish, in the sense their own reproductive survival is essential. As Blackmore explains, the truth trickery is liberally used. In many religions, God and truth are virtually synonymous. Rejecting the faith means turning away from truth. Converting others means giving them the gift of the true faith. This may seem odd when so many religious claims are clearly false, but there are many reasons why it works. For example, people who have a profound experience in a religious context are inclined to take on the memes of that religion. People who like and admire someone may believe their truth claims without question. If this is the case, and Blackmore's theory is indeed persuasive, it suggests that religions are more akin to chain letters than we might at first suspect. The core features a religion must have in order to achieve successful mimetic duplication or adherence is almost the same as those that allow chain letters to survive: desire and fear. In religion, however, desire can be dressed up in some fancy garb, like heaven, nirvana, Sakhkhand, or happy hunting grounds. The reason astrology has survived for countless centuries has nothing to do with its truth value, very low if any, but with its ability to give meaning and hope to individuals who are in need of finding some point or purpose to their day-to-day lives. Fear likewise can take on a much scarier face, like hell, damnation, wheel of samsara, Hades, and so on. Couple desire and fear with a meme that says it's your duty to spread the message vigorously, and you have a potentially winning religion. In this spiritual lottery, one that is governed by how many tickets can get circulated, popular religions must appeal to fundamental human needs in order to succeed. But more importantly, those appeals don't have to be necessarily true, provided that they appear viable. And given the plasticity of the human imagination, almost anything can appear viable, even if it is the opposite. The key point in all of this is propagation and successful duplication. Blackmore elaborates on how the Freudian concept of eros and thanatos works in luring new converts to a particular religion. The Catholic God is watching at all times and will punish people who disobey his commandments with most terrible punishments. Burning forever in hell, for example. These threats cannot easily be tested because God and hell are invisible, and the fear is inculcated from early childhood. Having raised the fear, Catholicism reduces it again. If you turn to Christ, you will be forgiven. God's love is always available, but at a price, and that price is often overlooked completely because it's paid so willingly. It's the price of investing massive amounts of time, energy, and money in your religion. In other words, working for the memes. The same eros-thanatos dichotomy is particularly acute in evangelical forms of Christianity, which emphasize that we live in a moral universe where the decisions we make have eternal consequences. Heaven and hell are taken to be literally true, as is the Bible, by which devout Christians should guide their every action. Calvary Chapel, founded by Chuck Smith 1927 to 2013 in Orange County, California in 1965, is one of the most successful new iterations of Christianity to garner a wide and devoted following. Although it started with fewer than 30 people in a small center in Costa Mesa, the movement claims on their official website that it has over 1,800 fellowships throughout the world. Chuck Smith was instrumental in reaching out to those disaffected youths who were seeking meaning in their lives and too often turning to drugs and alcohol to find some sort of relief. Because Smith was innovative and non-denominational in his approach, welcoming surfers, hippies, and those usually disdained by more conservative churches, his church had a more grassroots orientation than others. This was also the era of the Jesus people phenomenon, sometimes derogatorily labelled as Jesus freaks, where scores of young people, usually hippies, were bringing a new, revitalized form of Christianity, which allowed for a more open and expressive form of worship that included music and speaking in tongues. Yet Calvary Chapel also held very conservative views on what constituted true Christianity. Its official statement of faith is very clear and underlines Blackmore's thesis that religions which offer eternal rewards and eternal punishment are particularly effective in being propagated, even if not necessarily embraced. The following is but a glimpse of their core beliefs. We believe that the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments are the Word of God, fully inspired without error, and the infallible rule of faith and practice. We believe in the person of Jesus Christ, God's only begotten Son, conceived by the Holy Spirit. We believe in his virgin birth, sinless life, miracles and teachings, his substitutionary atoning death, bodily resurrection, ascension into heaven, perpetual intercession for his people, and personal visible return to earth. We believe that all people are sinners by nature and choice, falling short of God's standard and breaking his commandments, and therefore are under God's righteous judgment. We believe in a literal heaven and a literal hell, and that all those who place their faith, hope and trust in Jesus Christ will spend eternity in heaven with the Lord. Those who reject Jesus' free gift of salvation will spend eternity separated from the Lord. In 1978, Chuck Smith wrote a book, End Times, where he prophesied that the generation of 1948 would be the last generation, and that the world would end by 1981 at the latest. This, of course, didn't happen, and some Calvary Chapel members left the organization as a result. For others, however, the book was an awakening. As one reader reported, "This book changed my life. I've never been the same. I read this book back in 1980, and now it's 2008. This book was instrumental in drawing us closer to God and experiencing him forever." Chuck Smith is dear to my heart because of this. A thought-provoking book to change one's life and to turn from sin. Meanwhile, another more cynical reader underlined Blackmore's salient point about Eros and Thanatos in religion when he wrote in 2005, "This type of book is great for scaring people 25 years ago, and is common among the doomsdayers." I think Chuck Smith decided to stop predicting the end of the world with the next book after this, around 1988. Arguably, much of Calvary Chapel's appeal is that it's grounded in an absolute certainty that focuses on the Bible being without error. For those looking for a solid anchor in their lives, particularly if they've been adrift because of drugs, alcohol, and other addictions, Chuck Smith's ministry offered a welcoming respite where all the world's troubles could be resolved if one truly accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour. Interestingly, though the doctrines in evangelical forms of Christianity can become quite complex, e.g. pre-tribulation versus post-tribulation, the initial appeal to convert is quite simple. Repent and accept Jesus. According to Chuck Smith and other evangelicals of his ilk, it can literally take less than a minute to be converted and saved, provided one is sincere in their metanoia. But what drives such conversion is an existential choice with ultimate consequences. Spend eternity with God in heaven, or an eternity in hell with those who've rejected him. It's little wonder that such a binary choice forces many to make a hurried decision to accept what the ministry has on offer, lest waiting too long and then suffering unimaginable consequences. In the 1970s, end-of-the-world prophecies were all the rage, particularly because of Hal Lindsey's co-authored massive bestseller, The Late Great Planet Earth. This reportedly sold more copies than any other non-fiction book in that decade. Lindsey used various prophecies in the Old and New Testament to interpret current events, concluding that humankind was living at the end times and that it could happen much sooner than expected, even by the 1980s. Smith and Lindsey's doomsday prognostications are just a type of tactic that motivates seekers to convert and, in turn, preach to other non-believers to hurry up and decide to give their lives to Christ. Mimetically, the message is simple and goes right to the jugular of human emotion. The world is coming to an end. Do you want to spend eternity in heaven or hell? The choice is yours, but hurry, since time is running out. It's not surprising, therefore, that Lindsey's book and others like it became bestsellers. Fear sells. This, to be sure, is another way of saying that any idea or meme that plays on human emotions has a much better chance of being spread than those that don't. In advertising, for example, it's well known that ads which invoke strong emotional sentiment or which provoke biological desires tend to be successful in selling their respective products. Religions, old or new, tend to offer something ultimately desirable or ultimately threatening. Otherwise, there's no compelling reason to take the plunge. As with all successful memes, religious ideas must be relatively simple to be easily spread. Certain religions will never be very popular because they either tend to be too complicated to transmit without losing the very complexity they wish to retain, or because they generate safeguards against duplication. Judaism has been around much longer than either Christianity or Islam, but it remains a relatively small world religion with around 15 million adherents. Why so small? Especially when its core text, the Torah, has millions of copies in circulation? A number of possible answers present themselves, but clearly the intricate laws governing Jewish behavior, including circumcision, is one of them. But even more important than this is the general resistance of Jews to preach their religion to others. Compare a Jewish rabbi, for instance, with a Mormon missionary. How many times has someone of the Jewish faith knocked on our door, inviting us to the local temple? But how many times has a Mormon, or for that matter, a Jehovah's Witness, made personal inquiries of us and our faith? Whilst Blackmore's theory suggests that a popular religion must be relatively simple at its core, at least in the sense of being accepted or rejected by potential recruits, this doesn't mean that the most popular religions in the world are the most senseless. Her point, rather, is that the essential core doctrine must be simplified to a degree that its essence can be transmitted with the least difficulty. The downside, of course, to an extremely simple memeplex is that its very lenience may not ensure long-time commitments. The more complicated a conversion procedure, the more time and effort it takes, the more likely the neophyte will stay within the group and display adherence. Dean Kelly argues that strict religion tends to keep adherents more closely aligned and less likely to stray from the conservative faith. Some religions have small followings, but quite devoted members. Thus, even though Catholic Christianity may have a fairly complex theory, one need only think of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, its essential message necessary for conversion must be kept to a bare minimum. The Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed offer a simple memeplex. Otherwise, with a theology that's too abstract, potential recruits are likely to be warded off. On some level, this has already happened, since Catholicism is a much more complicated memeplex than fundamentalist biblical Christianity. Keep in mind that many Catholics today are not converts, but recipients of a birth heritage. Such cradle Catholics tend to know less about their faith than those who formally convert to Catholicism. For Catholic conversion, one must first be catechized to learn the basics of faith. Then one must be baptized and receive the various sacraments. In contrast, in some fundamentalist Christian churches, the process of conversion is extraordinarily simple, usually codified in a phrase such as, "I accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Saviour, and that he died for my sins and resurrected on the third day," etc. If you say the statement sincerely and repent for your sins, you're born again into the Christian community. You also receive the grace of Jesus and eternal life. Very simple compared with Catholic Christianity, and perhaps the reason why conservative Christianity has been, until recently, on the rise. In Islam, there is a similar scenario. One needs only to declare the Islamic creed. There is one God, and Muhammad is his prophet, with deep sincerity, to be converted. This helps in part to explain why Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, expected to significantly surpass Christianity. Blackmore explains the implications of such mimetic propagation. When we look at religions from a meme's eye view, we can understand why they've been so successful. These religious memes did not set out with the intention to succeed. They were just behaviours, ideas and stories that were copied from one person to another in the long history of human attempts to understand the world. They were successful because they happened to come together into mutually supported gangs that included all the right tricks to keep them safely stored in millions of brains, books and buildings, and repeatedly passed on to more. They evoked strong emotions and strange experiences. They provided myths to answer real questions, and the myths were protected by untestability, threats, and promises. They created and then reduced fear to create compliance, and they used the beauty, truth, and altruism tricks to help their spread. That's why they're still with us, and why millions of people's behavior is routinely controlled by ideas that are either false or completely untestable. Because Calvary Chapel declares that its teachings are based upon a literal interpretation of what the Bible means, it can justify its beliefs by citing various passages in the Old and New Testaments. This is a very powerful and persuasive way of convincing new seekers that Calvary Chapel is based on something that is true, certain, and inviolate. This assumes, however, that the Bible is true and not to be doubted. Thus, Chuck Smith's ministry started with a core axiom based precisely on doubling back and quoting Scripture. Calvary Chapel finds its legitimacy through the Bible, and anyone who's interested in the movement has access to the same source documents. This is an extremely potent form of legitimization, even if it begs the deeper epistemological issue of how one knows that a certain book or sets of books are without error. Since Chuck Smith and the leaders of Calvary Chapel base their precepts on the Bible, which dates back 2 millennia and is accepted as authoritative by the majority of Christians worldwide, they're convinced that they're preaching with a truth that can be supported by anyone in the congregation. Believing that one has the truth and it must be shared is an extraordinarily powerful incentive to share the gospel. Those hearing the message of two options, heaven or hell, will be compelled to respond, especially if they have been culturally conditioned to accept that the Bible is the Word of God. In other words, Calvary Chapel was amplifying a message that had already been seeded for decades throughout North America by earlier evangelists and preachers, and the wide distribution of the Bible in almost every city and town. What Chuck Smith did was to reach out to those who'd been ignored by more conventional churches, or those venues that young hippies resisted as not being open to their lifestyle. The Jesus People of the late 1960s and 1970s was primarily a youth movement. Chuck Smith welcomed them, and didn't disdain their long hair, their choice of clothing, love of surfing or rock music. He preached in a way that they could relate with, even if his ultimate message, tied as it was to a strict interpretation of the Bible, was quite conservative in its import. As the Calvary Chapel timeline elaborates, what a shock it was to the conservative middle-class congregation when the hippies arrived. Parents were deeply concerned about the hippie influence on their children and the criticism of their neighbours and other churches in the area. But the hippies' passion for Jesus and their love for their neighbours broke through. The church kept growing out of its buildings till the property on Sunflower and Fairview in Santa Ana was purchased and a circus tent erected that expanded to fit the 2,000-plus people in attendance. Mimetically, the message was simple: accept Jesus, threatening and alluring, heaven or hell, and potentially viral. Spread the good news. The growth of Calvary Chapel from its humble beginnings in Costa Mesa in 1965 is remarkable, particularly since it evolved in an area where more staid Protestant and Catholic churches already dotted the landscape. By 1967, it had to hold 2 church services at 9:30 and 11 o'clock in the morning because of the overflow crowds. By August of that same year, Chuck Smith was conducting a Bible study class on a local radio station that was broadcast every Sunday night. A year later, at the height of the hippie movement, Chuck Smith sponsored a young, long-haired Lonnie Frisbee to speak at the Calvary Chapel. He soon became very popular amongst the younger crowd, and attendance soared. In the early 1970s, given the increasing numbers, Calvary Chapel expanded and bought a larger property that could hold thousands. Smith also started his own Maranatha Christian Academy that initially accepted several hundred students. In 1975, Calvary Chapel Bible College was created. Chuck Smith implemented an authoritarian, patriarchal structure in his various fellowships, which allowed for one key minister as the leader of any particular branch with a group of senior elders as advisors. This allowed for each of the different branches to have some measure of autonomy and facilitated creating hundreds of centres across the United States and beyond. Such an organisational branching can be likened to a business that allows franchises to retain brand identity but function on their own, replete with their own distinctive management style. Smith died on October 3rd, 2013, in Newport Beach, California. The movement he founded, however, is still flourishing and has become one of the most successful Christian movements to have emerged from the 1960s. Conclusion: Memeplexes and the Future of Religion. Marshall McLuhan had much more to say than his pithy slogan that the medium is the message. He makes the astute observation that is instructive about how and why certain religions flourish and others do not. He writes, "Perhaps the most obvious closure or psychic consequence of any new technology is just the demand for it. Nobody wants a motor car till there are motor cars, and nobody's interested in TV until there are TV programs. This power of technology to create its own world of demand is not independent of technology being first an extension of our own bodies and senses. If we apply this truism, we don't desire objects we are ignorant of, to religion, then it raises a pivotal question. What makes a certain faith or belief system more appealing than another? What are the necessary prerequisites that must be in place for a specific idea to outcompete another? In other words, what are the sociological and psychological conditions that tilt one to favour, say, the Unification Church over the Divine Light Mission, if both are available options? The first response, naturally, would be geographic. We are products of our environment and what options it provides us. In sociology, the fancy word for why we tend to marry people in our local community is called residential propinquity, wherein people living in the same area or within neighbourhoods of each other tend to come together. Acquaintance propinquity, a form of proximity in existence when friends tend to have special bond of interpersonal attraction. Hence, if we're brought up Jewish, Christian or Muslim, we tend to stay with those religions. But a deeper question looms underneath the surface here. Why join any new religion? There must be a need or a desire if coercion is not operative. The answer is perhaps simpler than we might expect. In order to convert to Christianity, for example, one must a priori accept certain underlying premises, not the least of which is that humankind is fallen, sinful, and in need of radical redemption. Nobody wants to be saved from drowning in the ocean if they believe they are not, and are enjoying a relaxing day swimming and body surfing. Thus, for a religion to be viable, it must be viewed as being needed or wanted. It must, in other words, fulfill a desire. Christian missionaries ran into this problem whenever they encountered a culture that was relatively happy with its circumstances and surroundings, such as those living in the Hawaiian Islands. In order to make inroads and future converts to their faith, missionaries first had to convince the islanders that they were fundamentally deficient. In some, they had to convince people that they were really sinners and that the consequences in the afterlife were dire. Once that foundation had been established and accepted, even if begrudgingly, then the individual was ripe to be offered a solution. Missionaries don't go knocking on strangers' doors and tell them that everything's okay with them and the world. No, they set up a context, a worldview, where individuals are sinners and that society is corrupt. They present a moral version of Ludwig Boltzmann's understanding of entropy, which simply stated says, things are getting worse. Ideas or memes spread precisely to fill a gap or a need. But in order for any particular religious belief to become contagious, the environment must be conducive for its fructification. Veganism has become popular only in those places where there is a luxury to forego eating meat. Similarly, new religions can spread their ideas only in those areas which are politically tolerant and are viewed as providing a sense of meaning and purpose that is otherwise absent. In this sense, therefore, memes arise within memeplexes or systems of thought that precede their arrival, as Dawkins explains in the foreword to Blackmore's Meme Machine. Memes, like genes, are selected against the background of other memes in the meme pool. The result is that gangs of mutually compatible memes, co-adapted meme complexes or memeplexes, are found cohabiting in individual brains. This is not because selection has chosen them as a group, but because each separate member of the group tends to be favored when its environment happens to be dominated by the others. Because memes or ideas are not solo actors, relying in part on an infusing environment, new religions that do become successful are those that can find a niche in the spiritual marketplace that still has a space for newcomers. In reviewing the 5 different religious groups we've explored in this book, we can readily see how and why they became successful if we focus on where, when, and how they propagated their beliefs and what type of audience responded to them. First, Paramahansa Yogananda came to America in 1920 and followed Swami Vivekananda's successful introduction of Hinduism in the 1890s and early 1900s. His organization, Self-Realization Fellowship, incorporated Christian ideals and Hollywood-style advertising into his presentation of Hinduism, and thus piggybacked his memeplex on what was already a winning combination before he arrived. Second, John Roger Hinkins drew new followers to the movement of spiritual inner awareness by casting a wider net with the introduction of Insight seminars and the University of Santa Monica. But J.R. cloaked Insight and USM in such a way as to not make them appear to be feeder systems to his own spiritual teachings, despite the fact that they were intimately intertwined. In this way, it was akin to a religious Trojan horse memeplex, where the outer programs disguised within the essence of a much more unconventional theory. Third, God's direct contact movement became known around the globe by creating hundreds of vegan-only restaurants. They not only promoted a plant-based diet, but also advertised the spiritual teachings of Supreme Master Ching Hai. These food establishments served as a benign but powerful way of making Kuan Yin meditation much more widely known. As such, Ching Hai's religious memeplex became widely distributed. Fourth, Swami Prabhupada's hope of spreading Krishna consciousness throughout America and across the globe was greatly magnified by the utter simplicity of how the message was conveyed. This was codified by the famed Kali Santarana Upanishadic chant, which was only slightly modified to Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Given its melodic structure, this mantra became a meme and has been heard by millions of people around the world. It was even incorporated into one of the most popular songs ever recorded. What is important to remember, however, is that even though the mantra is simple, it encompasses a complex and historic memeplex. Fifth, given that humans are bounded by eros and thanatos, any religion that provides a gateway for eternal life and an escape from eternal death has an inherent attraction to those who believe that both are real after-death possibilities. Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel reached out to a youth movement in the 1960s and 1970s looking for meaning and purpose in their lives. These biblical ideas struck a chord, since they offered a pathway by which one could live a more directed and God-centered life. Arguing that we live in a moral universe with only 2 real metaphysical choices is an extraordinarily powerful meme, provided one actually believes such is true. Thus, the incentives of choice, both the push and the pull, were strongly in play. While meme theory is still hotly contested in academic and scientific circles, the very concept, as popularized by Dawkins and greatly expanded by Blackmore, is nevertheless a useful instrument by which to better understand why and how certain religions grow in popularity in contrast with others. What meme theory provides is a practical tool by which to distinguish differing aspects of a specific religion's appeal. Memetics as such focuses on the replications of ideas, regardless of their truth value or falsity. In this way, it is value neutral, since its modus operandi is to uncover the mechanics that allow for the transmission, acceptance, and further transference of ideas over time, given the necessary constraints of geography, society, and politics. Because of the invention of the Internet and later its most popular application, the World Wide Web, by Tim Berners-Lee, meme theory itself went viral, and now has a variety of different iterations and definitions, quite apart from what Dawkins and Blackmore initially intended. The word meme itself went viral and has evolved into something almost unrecognizable from its more staid academic birth in 1976. The internet, social media, and mobile technology have evolved so quickly and in such unexpected ways that today a meme can spread electronically to almost every country on Earth within seconds. This has major implications for religions in the future that wish to spread their teachings. As far back as 1996, Nicholas Negroponte, in his prophetic book Being Digital, argued that if information is not on the internet, it more or less doesn't exist. What Negroponte realized very early on was that in a few decades almost everyone would rely on the internet and its various applications for accessing information. This has turned out to be true in more ways than most realized. Couple this realization with ever-sophisticated algorithms engineered by artificial intelligence, AI, and we can only speculate how new religions a decade hence will attract new followers. Clearly, evangelism will take on new forms, utilizing virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and a world filled with new AI-styled engagements. Already some religions that are oriented around meditation have incorporated virtual reality applications and brain-sensing feedback systems into their teaching. But whatever new means of communication become adopted and stylized, they must dovetail with human needs and desires in order to become successful. Barring a radical alteration in human DNA and neural hijacking, religious memes and ideas invariably correlate to our own biological, psychological, and sociological conditioning. Religions, old or new, arise from that pre-existing operating system, and memes in the future will as well. Blackmore's mimetic theory is indeed very powerful and helpful in better understanding human culture, especially new religions. However, its analysis is strictly horizontal, failing to take into consideration the progressive stages of human thought. While memes explain how ideas infiltrate our minds and our society, they fail to explain how certain memes resonate with particular environments, that is, particular stages of evolutionary thought, better than others. Instead of placing all religious memes into the same linear category, a more helpful method would be to differentiate the various types of memes as they correspond to different psychosocial emotional levels of human well-being. Some religious memeplexes are clearly different, not just in content but in type. Certainly most of us recognize the difference between a Zen meditation master and a leader like Jim Jones. Thus, being able to adjudicate which stage a new religion fits offers a more accurate assessment of what they're all about. Ken Wilber's work on the spectrum of consciousness adds this necessary ingredient. He argues that just as there had been an evolution to the human body over millions of years, including the brain, so too has human consciousness evolved. This evolution of human consciousness can also be viewed as the evolution of human ideas, which are intimately dependent upon the particular structure of psychosocial awareness that's in evidence. The world does not so much change as does our mimetic interaction with it. Hence memes are structurally aligned to a particular pathway of growth. Wilber suggests that paying attention to a structure of consciousness via Jean Piaget's stages of psychogenetic growth will help us to better understand why certain memes are found appealing at different times and for different peoples. A good example of how memes relate to stages of consciousness would be buying Christmas presents for one's family. The gifts are invariably age-dependent. A 4-year-old's awareness of the world and wants, needs are dramatically different than a teenager's. The same with buying books for students in grammar school, high school and college. Each book or present contains ideas, but each is suited to the particular age of the recipient. To neglect the hierarchy of consciousness is to neglect the very instrumental guideline for mimetic reproduction. Therefore, Wilber suggests that only certain types of memes can be replicated due to the stage of consciousness that is presently engaged. Memes about sexual reproduction, for instance, will be much more popular with those who have undergone puberty than those who have not. The reason why is not due simply to mimetic mimicry, but also because of hormones. We cannot therefore divorce genetics and the growth of human consciousness from mimetics. They go hand in hand in some ways, only to depart significantly at other turns. Wilber's hierarchy of consciousness helps us to ladder memes according to human growth cycles, both individually and socially. Consequently, not only will we be better able to predict why certain ideas get passed along in a culture, we will be better suited to understand why some ideas never take hold among certain nations, peoples, or tribes. The main stages of human consciousness that Wilber delineates are pre-rational, magic, mythic, rational, and trans-rational. With each stage, corresponding memes would find their home. Memes that promote group thinking, a magical worldview, blind acceptance, non-scientific approaches to the world, and, correlated to that, a lack of critical thought, fit in the first category. Memes that allow for individuality, skepticism, a scientific worldview, and perspectivism, being able to step into another's shoes, or meme as it were, fit in the second level. And memes that incorporate the former, but add also an even broader worldview, one that may coordinate and integrate different perspectives and may draw upon mysticism, are placed in the final category. Unfortunately, because pre-rational memes and trans-rational ones are both non-rational, sometimes the distinctions between them become blurred. In this case, trans-rational groups are wrongly categorized as infantile, and magic mythic ones as transcendent. Wilber elaborates on this pre-trans fallacy. The essence of the pre-trans fallacy is itself simple. Since both pre-rational states and trans-rational states are in their own ways non-rational, they appear similar, or even identical to the untutored eye. And once pre and trans are confused, then one of two fallacies occurs. All higher and trans-rational stages are reduced to lower and pre-rational states. Genuine mystical or contemplative experiences, for example, are seen as a regression or throwback to infantile states of narcissism, oceanic addualism, indisassociation, and even primitive autism. On the other hand, if one is sympathetic with higher or mystical states, but one still confuses pre and trans, then one will elevate all pre-rational states to some sort of trans-rational glory. The infantile primary narcissism, for example, is seen as an unconscious slumbering in the mystico unio. Wilber further contends that these stages of human evolution are witnessed not only ontogenetically but also phylogenetically. In other words, there's a parallel between an individual's evolution from pre-operational to operational to formal operational and the evolution of human cultures. We can in a way witness the classic evolutionary stages of thought that have taken millions of years to go through in one individual's life, assuming this individual reaches the formal operational level and perhaps beyond. The transrational stage of human consciousness, claims Wilber, is only tapped by a few, and so still a rarity at this time. What does all of this say in regard to evaluating the rise of new religions? Quite simply, it suggests that certain religious memes may appeal to certain brain states. Pre-rational groups, such as of tribal origin, would identify with particular memes and not others. God, or the gods, most likely, would not be described abstractly but very concretely, perhaps in anthropomorphic terms. Magical thought would also be a significant element here. The way children yet to develop their operational or formal operational cognitive skills see God and the world serves as an example of this state of consciousness. Similarly, religious memes that allow for a cause and effect view of the world, which involve a more abstract view of the divine and which promote scientific thinking, would find their place in the mind of those at the rational level. And continuing this line of argument, trans-rational memes would appeal to those who have mastered the former level and can now open their minds to an even deeper understanding of reality, whatever that be. Wilber argues that at this stage one can witness the interconnectedness of the world and of ideas. One can see the larger scheme of things, and if one has not yet attained Maslow's self-actualized state of consciousness, one can envision and work towards it. Wilber is not only saying that religious memes match our brain states, but also that our religious ideas evolve as our brain states evolve. It makes sense, then, that at 5 I believed in Santa Claus, but at 10 I no longer did. At 12 I believed in Adam and Eve and creationism, but at 18 I was an evolutionist. At 20 I believed in an anthropomorphic God that transformed into a non-theist version by 25, and so on. Particular memes resonated with the particular brain state I was in. And the same is true, contends Wilber, for human cultures. There's a big caveat here. it may sound like Wilbur is judging religions. When he says a specific religion fits more into the pre-rational category, is he not criticizing it? Certainly there may be a problem here, if his objective is to purport ontological truth, but Wilbur is not. Rather, his aim is to recognize psychological patterns of human thought, following the lead of Piaget, who argued that our concepts of God evolve with our cognitive states. At the operational level, one will see God very differently than one at the formal pre-rational state. Is one stage better than the other? Well, perhaps it's best to say that each stage serves as a foundation for the next, and so plays an invaluable role in our cognitive development. We should not sneer at the pre-rational level, since it's necessary to lead us to the rational level. Likewise, we should not ridicule the rational stage, since it is the transitional bridge to the trans-rational. The trans-rational level in Wilbur's mind is the direction we all seem to be eventually heading. Some individuals and religious groups serving as exemplary models may have already accessed it. This stage may be a higher level of cognitive development, but the adjective better is not necessary. Overall, we can see that religious memes come in different types and correspond with different stages of consciousness. Recognizing the interplay between memetics and genetics certainly helps scholars to better understand how to adjudicate new religions, and may in the long run help us to predict which new religions, now in the competitive spiritual marketplace, will survive in the future. As expected, trans-rational memes springing up in a tribal culture may not replicate well, and mythic memes in a strongly scientific community may die out. Thus, matching the meme to the proper psychosocial emotional stage of the potential believers will help to ensure its survival and possible success. About the author. Andrea Diem is a professor of philosophy and chairperson of the Department of Mount San Antonio College. She received her Ph.D. in religious studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, under the famed scholar Ninian Smart. Dr. Diem also earned an M.A. in religious studies at the same institution, where she conducted a deep study into Gnosticism under the tutelage of Birger Pearson. Her M.A. thesis, entitled The Gnostic Mystery, A Connection Between Ancient and Modern Mysticism, was later published as a book, as was her Ph.D. dissertation, The Guru in America, The Influence of Radhaswami on New Religious Movements. As an undergraduate, Andrea Diem received her B.A. in psychology from the University of California, San Diego, where she served as a research assistant to Dr. V.S. Ramachandran on visual perception. Professor Andrea Diem received an honorary doctorate honoris causa from the Dealbach Educational Institute in 2021 for her work in consciousness studies and neurophilosophy. Dr. Diem is the author of many books, including When Scholars Study the Sacred, The Rise of New Religions, and The Jain Path. On a personal note, Dr. Diem is married to Professor David Christopher Lane. They have 2 boys, Kelly and Sean. The entire family likes to surf. This has been Contagious Cults, Meme Theory and the Evolution of 5 New Religions, written by Andrea Diem, narrated by Paul Metcalfe. Copyright 2023 by Andrea Diem. Production copyright by Andrea Diem.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.